Story 1.
Husband's epic revenge on cheating wife and her affair partner after discovering their secret. Most individuals lack a true understanding of how lengthy eternity endures, often conflating it with the idea of infinity. However, my personal experience revealed that eternity spanned precisely 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and several peculiar hours. It concluded much as it began, with my wife Tracy affectionately locking eyes with her partner and sharing a passionate kiss. Except this time, I was this partner for the first time, and the kiss followed my proposal for her to be mine forever on the night I presented the engagement ring. In a different setting, I found myself a mere bystander in a restaurant 2 towns away from our residence as Tracy and an apparent new lover exchanged adoring glances and leaned in for a passionate kiss. The details of how I ended up in the same restaurant as this couple are irrelevant. Their location, an hour away from our hometown, indicated a deliberate effort to remain discreet. Initially curious, my emotions swiftly shifted from curiosity to shock, disgust, and anger as the scene unfolded before me. I briefly entertained the thought of confronting them physically. However, I was always taught never to smack a woman, so I sat there in complete astonishment since they focused solely on each other. Feeling secure that no one who knew them would see, they leisurely enjoyed their meal, occasionally engaging in a kissing game. I ate slowly, had dessert, and observed them throughout. My emotions fluctuated between rage and helplessness. Upon finishing their meal, they stood up, held hands, and left. Seated there in silent rage, I felt like the most ignorant fool. I had been married to Tracy for over 14 years, with 2 exclusive years preceding that, yet I never suspected she was switching both ways. She never showed interest in another woman, never dropping hints in any conversation we ever had. I erroneously believed I knew her inside and out, anticipating growing old together. The revelation of her switch hitting paled in comparison to the anger I felt at her apparent infidelity. Regardless of the gender of her partner, she had redirected her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago when she accepted my ring. It signified an enduring eternity, seemingly timeless. Who would have thought that some eternities have an expiration date? Settling the bill, I entered the car and drove home slowly. I had much to contemplate. Tracy did not anticipate my early return after the trip, but fortunately I resolved all issues ahead of schedule. Hence, I headed home on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon as initially planned. I had been away since Monday morning, and apart from missing Tracy and the kids, the absence of closeness for more than 3 consecutive days left me with pent-up energy that needed release. At least until I witnessed what unfolded in the restaurant. I was an hour away from our hometown and could have easily driven straight through. However, since I was ahead of schedule, I opted to go out to dinner for a break from driving, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for the evening if Tracy wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they were aware of the situation, since neither had mentioned anything different. Perhaps they were as in the dark as I was, I thought. Regardless, I knew they wouldn't be pleased with what happened next. On the way home, I engaged in the usual self-analysis. What did I do wrong? How long did it last? Etc. At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. Chuckling, I'm talking about myself, gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9 and Tracy still wasn't home. My daughters, Lisa, 12, and Ariel, 10, greeted me happily, but I watched without truly seeing them, nervous and doubtful that I would be home early. The same couldn't be said for Tracy. When Tracy entered about 2 hours later, she must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I observed a shift in her demeanor, appearing less content than in our previous encounters. She inquired about my unexpected presence, expressing concern with her first words. I responded playfully, emphasizing her greeting. Tracy, with a slight twitch in her forehead, mentioned that if she had known I would be home early, she would have prepared a nice dinner. She went on to reveal that she had ordered pizza for the kids, and she and Kate had opted for wine and sandwiches downtown. Tracy, avoiding eye contact, asked if I remembered Kate from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Tracy then proceeded to sarcastically recall Kate as a blonde with ample chest, remarking on the trail of admirers she left behind. I couldn't help but think that Tracy had the ability to assemble a football team merely by entering a room. This wasn't solely due to her captivating effect on married women. Kate, I used to think to myself, possessed the allure of a goddess with her remarkable chest. She was about 26 years old and had started working at the insurance company where Tracy had worked the previous year. The two became instant friends and apparently somewhere down the line. At 39 years old, Tracy could still turn more than a few heads. She was also blonde, with a beautiful figure and curves in all the right places. She was only 10 lbs heavier than when we first met, but it was still a great package, and at least until recently. It was exclusively my package. Despite the worried expression on her face, Tracy acted calmly. As for me, I could barely stand on my feet, so I just told her that I was tired and was going to bed. She gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed up the stairs. Perhaps I was mistaken, but I was almost sure that I felt the taste of love making games on her lips. I went to bed but did not fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, I realized Tracy was talking to Kate on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Tracy getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I scared her so much that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was dreaming and wouldn't find out about it. My heart sank even lower. Between kids' stuff and housework, I didn't have to interact with Tracy too much for the rest of the weekend. She wanted to have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I said I wasn't in the mood and just left the room, effectively ending the conversation. She must have known something was up because I'm rarely rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I requested a day off from my boss due to some personal issues I was facing. Having gone through a divorce about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago, John, my boss, had some understanding that something was amiss in the Mason family. Considering the success of my sales trip the previous week, he didn't hesitate when I asked for time off. As I prepared to leave his office, he handed me his business card, revealing it to be that of his divorce lawyer. He conveyed his regret, expressing sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Tracy. I acknowledged his sentiment, stating that I too had envisioned a lasting connection with Tracy. Acting on my boss's suggestion, I sought legal advice 2 days later. Despite my lawyer's potential for a more professional approach, she displayed genuine concern for my emotions and offered gentle guidance. She seemed surprised when I decided against hiring a private investigator to gather concrete evidence of Tracy's infidelity. I detected understanding in her gaze as she pointed out that in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. The primary concern, she noted, could revolve around potential challenges with visitation rights, although she expressed confidence that this would likely not be a significant issue. No matter how hard I tried, being around Tracy and the girls at home was something I couldn't handle. Tracy likely sensed this, given our minimal communication. I believe the girls sensed something was amiss by our unusual quietness. I gave Tracy numerous chances to talk, but she never seized the opportunity. The situation escalated when Tracy was served at work the following week. Call it petty if you will, but I wanted Tracy to experience even a fraction of the pain I felt. I presume she was served around 11:03 a.m. because my phone started ringing incessantly at 11:05. I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unfamiliar numbers, suspecting she might be using friends' phones to contact me. Surprisingly, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her with Kate. And I was having a surprisingly good day. Tracy's car was already in the garage when I arrived at 5:30. She wasted no time acknowledging her presence, expressing her anger about being served in front of friends and colleagues. I remained silent until entering the house and putting down my things. The girls were in the living room, engrossed in what seemed to be a movie on the big screen. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure she was served alongside her mistress for her own comfort. Tracy's anger disappeared, replaced by tears. I retorted, questioning her knowledge about Kate and remarking on the lack of caution in their actions. I asked her 2 things, how long and when she had planned to tell me. She responded, admitting it had been about 6 months and insisting they were planning to inform me soon. In less than 30 seconds, Tracy's demeanor shifted from venomous to defeated. She stumbled to the kitchen table and sat down. I walked over to the drinks cabinet, grabbed a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could homicide, she would have perished within the first 2 seconds. I observed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. Quietly, I asked how I couldn't have known about her switch hitting after all this time. She responded that she too had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned, it just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Tracy expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I expressed my shock, questioning whether 6 months was insufficient for her exploration. I mentioned that if she truly loved me, she would remember our vows and not entertain the idea of exploring at all. I shared my belief that fidelity transcended gender, and she shouldn't have considered such actions. She countered by suggesting that true love could forgive a mistake, to which I argued that once could be a mistake, but 6 months indicated a conscious decision. I expressed my frustration, emphasizing that love should not give her the license to tear my heart out and jeopardize our family. I asserted that her actions had nothing to do with gender, labeling herself self-centered. She retorted, insisting that it had a lot to do with girls, and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, accusing her of turning into a piece of garbage before my eyes, and challenged her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I accused her of being in love with the other woman, pointing out that I had fallen to second place. When she denied it, I yelled at her to stop, asserting that I knew what I saw and knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together, despite her quick attempt. To salvage the situation, I argued that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I expressed the sentiment that everything might have been different if it were another man. At least then I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress, ultimately stealing my wife. A few months later, I learned that the children knew nothing about Tracy's affair. They thought that Aunt Kate was just a close friend of Mom's. They had both seen the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch, but since Aunt Kate wasn't a man, they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner, and the kids mentioned that Kate had been spending more time in the house since I moved out. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Kate was one of the reasons Tracy and I were getting a divorce. Since we live in a no-fault divorce state, our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay her child support, she got the house until the kids went to college, and, of course, I had to pay child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Tracy and I kept in touch through the girls. They were involved in all sorts of activities, both in and out of school, and Tracy and I tried our best to show them that we were going to support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Tracy fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally did it. I was polite, nothing more, when I ran into Tracy and Kate at my daughter's parties. As for family events, I was always invited, but knowing that Tracy would be there, I apologized and escaped. For forgiveness, I know I was giving up some wonderful family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my composure when she and Kate were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As you might expect, each of us retained the friends we had before we got married. Almost all the friends we made after we got married stayed with Tracy. As one of the husbands explained to me, many of them felt awkward around me, given that I had lost my wife to a woman. The consensus seemed to be that I somehow deserved it, and several of our married women friends almost made just that claim. I let them go without a fight because, as the old saying goes, you learn who your real friends are under adverse conditions. By my own choice, I didn't date much for the next few years. My heart certainly wasn't ready for this, and I didn't need much communication. After a year of being alone, I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German Shepherd who was probably about 3 years old. I actually went to the shelter and asked them to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been there since he was a frisky puppy, but after being rejected repeatedly, he turned into a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest pair of eyes I've ever seen on an animal. I felt like we were soulmates because we were both rejected. The dog's name was Bob, not some cute animal name or something named after a cute Disney character, just Bob. Bob caught me, and I caught Bob. The first thing he did when I brought him into my apartment, after sniffing around, was to climb onto the couch next to me and curl up next to me. He was good with the girls when I had them over on the weekends, but I think Bob liked it best when it was just us guys. He loved to walk or ride with me, and we could talk about almost any topic. Admittedly, Bob was mostly silent during these conversations, but I knew from the look on his face and ears that he was paying attention to everything I said. A few years later, my oldest daughter, Lisa, met a guy from Boston in college and got married. Since I was doing pretty well in my engineering career, I could afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I couldn't have been more proud of her as I walked her down the aisle, but after the service, I earned a reprimand from her for ruining my one line. I realized this right during the rehearsal, but under the pressure of the real situation, my voice cracked. Coming to my senses, I responded to the question of who was giving Lisa away with a simple "I" instead of the correct "her mother and I." I admitted to almost choking on my words. Taking my seat in the front row beside Tracy, she leaned towards me and quietly remarked that it was disgusting, and I knew it. Kate, seated next to Tracy, leaned forward and audaciously glared at me. I discreetly told her to forget it with just my lips, checking if the pastor noticed our exchange. Wedding ceremonies always bring back memories for me, and at first I looked back on my wedding day fondly. This memory lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Tracy and Kate together in the restaurant when I found out about them. When I awoke from my reverie, Tracy was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. I guess I wasn't the only one taking a walk down memory lane. Although I didn't try to watch, I noticed that Tracy and Kate seemed to be having a great time together with Lisa, her new husband Jerry, and almost everyone else. It was then that I noticed I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for myself, I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking my glass, I sat down at my table and quietly patted myself on the back for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to play the father of the bride again when my youngest, Ariel, had her beau walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet people. Returning home from a 3-day trip out of state. 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour from my apartment. Though I usually avoid such bars due to my dislike of country western music, they were advertising pork barbecue, so I had to stop. The food was great, and as the DJ started playing music around 8 p.m., I looked around in case there might be someone worth chatting with, so to speak. Just then, a 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked through the door. She was absolutely gorgeous, and I wondered why an unmarried young black woman was at the bar at this time. On the other hand, there I was, the lonely old white guy. I knew she was probably too young for me, but damn it, I motioned to the bartender to put everything she drank on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. To my surprise, she sat down next to me and introduced herself as Jade. During a pleasant evening, she suggested going to her place, catching me off guard. Without hesitation, we headed towards the door, when a man in a cowboy hat approached Jade and lightly kissed her cheek. I halted abruptly, and Jade reassured me, introducing him as her husband, Fred. She asked if he could join and have a look, to which Fred grinned and mentioned their involvement. I expressed my discomfort, stating there was something wrong with the situation and the messed-up generation. I raised my hands, signaling them to stop, and left alone to my car. In another attempt to find companionship, I turned to my church. Carrie, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, a 34 billions chest, long legs, and a big smile, and I got along well. After a few dates, we went back to my apartment, leading to closeness. However, during the encounter, she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name. The situation escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. In response, she expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. In silence, I drove her home, and needless to say, there was no fifth date. For my next dating venture, I invited a CO worker over for an evening of food and dancing. Allison Webb, a vivacious 42-year-old divorcee who had separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was a blonde with a slightly larger chest and a bump than someone of average proportions. We had been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point, she had heard my sad story, and I had heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful evenings, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company, even before our first time making love. Looking forward to a great time at the wedding, I invited Allison to be my date. She responded seriously, expressing uncertainty about accompanying me to my daughter's wedding considering the family dynamics with my ex-wife. I mentioned that she would need the green light from Bob, my wingman, a 45 lb German Shepherd mix with sophisticated taste. I explained that if Bob didn't like her, he wouldn't accompany me to the wedding. She found this peculiar and labeled me a strange person. After passing Bob's test the following week, Allison agreed to be my wedding date, bringing joy to the girls who were happy I wouldn't be attending solo. Tracy, however, appeared displeased with this arrangement, consistently giving me disgruntled looks. Since I didn't engage much with her, I disregarded her opinion. However, it bothered Allison, who sensed Tracy's dislike for her. At the rehearsal dinner, I found Tracy alone and finally confronted her, asking about her problem. Tracy responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Allison and questioning if I was now dating Girl Scouts. I noted that Tracy's jealousy didn't look good on her, reminding her that Allison, Tracy, and Kate were the same age. I playfully remarked that Tracy had traded me for a younger female version, and she responded with shy grace. A year later, Allison became my second wife, and life went on. Truthfully, I had completely forgotten that I was on the bone marrow registry when I got a call one day at work and was told that, after 30 years, I was a match for someone. Thrilled at the opportunity to help save someone's life, I knew the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat inconvenient, but my hero complex made me more than willing to undergo the procedure. Further testing was required, and if it was favorable, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks. After granting my consent, I told them I was on board. While not very religious, I believe in God, and there's an old saying that God works in mysterious ways. I never thought about it until 4 days later, when I spoke on the phone with my oldest daughter, Lisa, during our weekly conversation. Ariel and I avoid discussing Tracy's life, but Lisa mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Kate, and they were actively involved. Through Lisa, I conveyed my best wishes to Kate and Tracy, expressing that despite the pain caused by their actions, I didn't wish them harm. Lisa warned that as an adult, I could call them myself. I acknowledged this but explained that the less I talked to them, the less likely I was to say something unpleasant that I might regret later. Lisa encouraged me to come to terms with the divorce, highlighting that I've been happily married to Allison for almost 2 years. Acknowledging my happiness, I shared that while I no longer hated Tracy, she wasn't on my Facebook friends list. I decided to send Tracy flowers with a card of good wishes. Later, as I ordered the bouquet, a thought struck me. Bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence of Kate finding a match around the same time as me seemed too convenient. Aware of the anonymity in the donation process, I contacted my registry contact, pretending to be optimistic, and inquired about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She stuttered and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. Frustrated, I realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Kate. Angered by the situation, I reflected on how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life through a bone marrow donation. I determined it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, I called my registry contact back and said I was refusing to make the donation. She almost burst into tears, and when she came to her senses, she asked me if there was any specific reason why I backed down. She explained that although I had the right to refuse, this was almost never done and would cause great consternation at the registry. I apologized for causing horror, but told her it was in my own best interest to refuse. She muttered that she was sorry and told me that if I changed my mind in the very near future, I should call her. Allison was furious when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her that I found out who the donation was supposed to go to. She just knew that I had abandoned the obligation to possibly save someone's life. My wife expressed her frustration, practically screaming at me, questioning why, after expressing the desire to help, I now wanted to ruin someone's life. It was the first time I heard Allison use strong language, and I decided to be honest with her, explaining that I wouldn't have informed my ex-wife or Kate about the donation if I had a choice. She was unimpressed by my reasoning, accusing me of denying Kate a chance at life for revenge. I clarified that it wasn't revenge, emphasizing my efforts to have as little in common with my ex-wife and Kate as possible since they both hurt me. Allison questioned if they knew about her involvement, and I assured her that everything was done anonymously and I only found out about it by luck. As I shared this, Allison's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity to save someone's life, emphasizing the weight of holding Kate's life in my hands. She whispered that I was too nice a guy to withhold help, and that the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, stating that I wouldn't feel guilty as Kate and Tracy had broken my heart. I emphasized that they would never know it was me. Allison expressed concern, mentioning the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. Allison and I continued to have disagreements, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point, she asked about my Christian charity, to which I responded by questioning whether I should blindly give money to someone who might damage me. She called me ridiculous. In response, I explained that they hadn't torn out my heart and turned my world upside down like they did to me. I expressed my reluctance to simply shrug off the pain and help them after 17 years. I reminded her that Tracy had been married to Kate longer than to me and suggested she deal with it. Allison insisted they had made a decision, and I replied quietly that they could live or not, indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room, informing Allison that I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner, as the girls were coming and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder, instructing me to take a shower before we ate. I knocked the living crap out of the target with 500 rounds from my 9mm. I can't explain why, but shooting always relaxes me. I think it's because you have to really concentrate on what you're doing, and when you stop concentrating so hard, your body goes into a relaxed mode, at least that's my thought, and I stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home, so when I got home, I quickly headed to the shower. I glanced at the dining table. It was set for 6 people, and from the smell, Allison was cooking a roast. She is a great cook, and I was hoping she would make these little brown potatoes instead of mashed potatoes. After taking a shower, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Ellie a glass of wine. She seemed a little nervous, which I put down to her wanting the dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was sitting in the living room reading on the computer when the door opened, and the girls came in, not accompanied by their husbands but by Tracy and a shabby-looking Kate. I wasn't happy to see any of them, and I shot Allison a glare as I stood up to greet everyone. I kissed both girls but didn't say anything to my ex or Kate. I noticed that they greeted Allison with what could be called enthusiasm. There seemed to be a lot of whispering around. Not having been born yesterday, I immediately knew that Allison had orchestrated this little intervention. I was more inclined to think of it as an ambush, since apparently I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about just taking my phone and leaving, but then I decided it was time for me to speak up. At first, however, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Kate's illness was the main topic of conversation at the table, although I took no part in it, sitting with what I thought was a thoughtful expression on my face. I suppose dinner and dessert were good. I really couldn't tell. Being the good host, I provided everyone with their after-dinner drinks and we moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I questioned who would speak first. The woman who had betrayed my trust to arrange the meeting. The woman who had broken my heart years ago but now believed I owed her a favor. Or perhaps the woman who had taken a married woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I made my statement, I looked at each face in turn, and none of the women could meet my gaze. Allison seemed excited when I called her name, and my eldest daughter, Lisa, took the initiative to speak. She acknowledged my lingering anger toward Mom and Aunt Kate but criticized my refusal to donate bone marrow as childish and petty, stating it was beneath me. Lisa argued that seeking revenge by denying someone a chance at life was wrong, emphasizing that it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act like hitting someone with a whipped cake. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat, shaking my head slightly. I expressed my anger and stated that every action in life has consequences. I noted that Tracy and Kate never expected such severe consequences but were now trying to make their problem mine. I highlighted the unexpected opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me. Despite their belief that it was driven by revenge, I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the woman who stole my wife survive? And I don't think any of you even considered the fact that you think I should be easier on Kate because she's a woman. If her name was Carl and he was a 200 lb man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Kate attempted to convey her feelings by staring intensely at the carpet. Seated beside her on the couch, Tracy reached over and gently squeezed Kate's hand. I asserted that my decision was not driven by revenge but by hatred toward Kate. I expressed that I despised her, harboring no intention of assisting her in any situation. I highlighted my minimal communication with her during the 17 years she was with Tracy. Tracy sniffled, holding back tears, and questioned whether I hated her to the extent that I would deprive someone else of a chance to live. She appealed to my past love for her, suggesting that considering it a noble thing to do would be a matter of honor. I retorted, expressing skepticism about Tracy's notion of honor, calling her a fancy woman and stating that she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My volume rose and I tried my best not to tell them all, including Allison, to burn in hell and leave me alone. I took a couple of deep breaths, and Allison apparently decided that I wasn't angry enough with her. She quietly told me that I'm a good person and always do the right thing, emphasizing that retreating was wrong and that I would never be able to live with myself if I did that. Lisa interjected, reminding me that I taught Ariel and her to always do the right thing, even if it seemed wrong. Acknowledging this, I asserted that my decision was for me to avoid any regrets or loss of sleep. Kate suddenly exclaimed, pleading with me not to let her die. Despite acknowledging the offense I felt, she appealed to the grim reality of her situation, mentioning the slim chances of survival unless I donated my bone marrow. Kate's eyes looked haunted. Asking me to help save her life must have been the hardest thing she's ever done. I looked deep into those haunted eyes. I did not feel the joy of confirming my decision, but I confirmed it. No, that's all I said. I didn't say the phrase "I'm sorry" because frankly, I wasn't sorry. I won't do anything in my power to help this woman. Kate took my answer better than Tracy, who burst into tears. Allison walked over to the couple to calm them down, and I heard her whisper, "I'll try. I'll talk to him." She was so caught up in the moment that Allison never realized that she had put our marriage in jeopardy. I will have to think long and hard about whether I can bridge the gap in our trust. I grabbed the car keys from the key ring where they were located. I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days. I didn't answer any of the dozens of phone calls from Allison or the kids. The house was dark. I quickly looked around and decided that Allison had stopped somewhere else for the time being. A suitcase and some clothes were missing, but almost everything else was left untouched. I also grabbed my suitcase and packed a few things, taking most of my clothes and most of my belongings with me. I left my wedding ring in the middle of the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, I received an anonymous call that turned out to be Allison. She expressed disbelief that our relationship was ending because I refused to be what she considered the biggest idiot in the world. I responded by expressing my astonishment at being married to someone who had completely violated my trust. I suggested that both of us could fix the situation, and if anyone was seeking revenge, it wasn't me but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I criticized her for her actions and remarked that she really sucked. Kate passed away 2 months after our official divorce, and I learned about it through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case, and none of my daughters kept me informed. Despite the estrangement from my daughters after the confrontation, I stood firm in my belief and stance of not helping Kate, and neither I nor my girls backed down. My decision was the right one for me. I never lost a minute of sleep over not giving Kate my bone marrow. The people at the bone marrow registry were not very understanding of my individual situation and completely crossed me off the list. I was fine with this because the likelihood of me getting a second match was extremely unlikely. Bob was a bit moody and not exactly thrilled with any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so. But that was okay because at 62 I wasn't really looking. For wife number 3, somewhat surprisingly, I was still getting my share of good closeness. I learned that at that age, eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4 to 1, and if her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for a roll in the hay for the evening. Of course, we couldn't frolic with too much youth. After all, neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we both enjoyed a nice roll in the hay. I jokingly called my ladies my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years when my youngest, Ariel, called to tell me that Tracy had died a few days ago. She thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and had 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I could improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back, alone. It was a good ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. About 3 minutes passed before the first salvo was fired. This came from Lisa. She abruptly questioned why Aunt Kate was allowed to die, and I responded, noting the unchanged nature of the conversation after 4 years. Referring to Kate as a wife thief, I asserted that it would be the final discussion on the matter. Changing the topic, I pointed out a young man at the bar, suggesting a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Lisa. Jerry expressed, without hesitation, that he would damage him. And when asked about a potential affair, he stated the man would already be dead. I drew a parallel, mentioning that since he would be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed, and I clarified that I didn't save Kate's life partly due to her being a woman, which may have been a mistake. I asserted that I shouldn't have saved the life of the man involved with my wife, or the one who stole it. Jerry agreed, with the realization dawning on him, and he looked around the room, observing understanding gradually light up in each pair of eyes. I quietly shared that I wasn't proud of my decision, but not ashamed either, explaining that Kate didn't deserve my compassion for stealing the love of my life. Ariel questioned how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I confessed to having loved her mother deeply, but when she broke my heart, much of that love turned to hate. Acknowledging that I was just a man, not the monster portrayed by her mother, I expressed that things didn't turn out well for her mother and that karma eventually caught up with her and her friend. Tears filled the eyes of the other 4 adults in the room, while the children looked confused and worried. I recognized that it would take time for all of us to come to terms with the situation and suggested that we not dwell on the past as life goes on.
Story 2.
My wife was unfaithful to me, but not with a neighbor, best friend, or someone from the gym. No, it's not a typical affair. Let me calmly share this with you all. My wife cheated on me with my stepfather. I loved my mother until her last day. She was my everything. We always supported each other in our projects, at least until her passing 3 years ago, leaving a huge void in my heart that I thought I could fill with my wife, Melissa. However, my mother had one pseudo-negative side. She didn't fully appreciate her husband, Richard. You see, Richard is my stepfather. They married about 10 years ago, and I must admit he wasn't a bad father figure. He taught me how to drive and calculate taxes. I start with the positive to ease into the next revelation. Melissa's behavior became a bit strange. I reminisced a lot about my mom, and according to Melissa, There were whole days when I seemed depressed. Coping with such a loss isn't easy, and I don't think I can be blamed. Now, Richard becomes relevant because one day, I was using Melissa's phone to respond to her work messages. Nothing inappropriate happened. It was the typical movie scene. She was in the bath and got a work text. Knowing her business well, I replied, even warning her about it. While replying, Melissa received another text, and since the notification popped up, I ended up reading it. It was from a certain Rick. The message started with, "Hey Millie." Millie is a nickname I gave Melissa when we first met, and I'm the only one who calls her that. The fact that Rick had no last name in his contact profile caught my attention with a red flag. Feeling uneasy, I opened the message to dispel doubts. What I found left me paralyzed with horror. Rick apologized for writing at that time, expressing his inability to stop thinking about Melissa. Examining the rest of the conversation revealed deleted messages and another one-time view message. Trembling with fear, my worst fears came true. Melissa was having an affair with somebody else. As evident from the beginning, you might already have a notion of the person involved. Who exactly was this Rick? Well, was it the same individual? I knew it was Richard, my stepfather. That's when I devised a plan to confirm it. Initially, I messaged the so-called Rick, instructing him to meet me the next day in a specific part of town. He had to be seated at a designated table wearing a green shirt, details he didn't quite comprehend initially. Despite the risk, I insisted he comply, deleting our earlier exchanged messages to erase any evidence. The next day, I would be confronting the individual without him realizing it concerned me. It gave me a lot of courage. I'm not a violent person, but given the situation, I dislike being perceived as a fool. The next day, armed with my best arguments, I positioned myself in a public place to confront the scoundrel making advances at my wife. However, the plan backfired when I arrived at the designated spot, only to find a person in a green shirt. That's right, you guessed it. It was Richard. He looked somewhat uneasy, perhaps aware that his actions were wrong, but seemingly indifferent from the start. I decided to play with the situation a bit. I encountered him on the street, asking what he was doing there. I attempted to keep him from noticing, but he seemed to be sweating excessively. He mentioned waiting for somebody, but provided no further details, and swiftly left the place, possibly fearing a confrontation. I swear I don't know how I restrained the urge to confront him physically. I recognize the need to keep a cool head in such scenarios, and although I don't want to think the worst, at least, well, I did go home with an uneasy conscience. That night, I questioned Melissa about her relationship with Richard, and she immediately grew uncomfortable and defensive. She avoided my questions and told me she did not understand what I was even talking about. Well, I told her right off the bat that I had been suspecting things like that. Richard was seeing somebody else. I said I had no problem with it, as he deserves to move on with his life too. It just hurt a little that he wasn't confident enough to tell me since we were so close. Instead of telling me to try to talk to him about it, Melissa told me to leave it alone, as it was his private life. And if he did not comment on it, maybe it was out of embarrassment or something. So, it's best to just keep it to himself. Well, I went ahead and insisted a bit and ended up stating that I asked her about her relationship with Richard so that she would be the one to ask him about it, and sighed. I felt a little broken by all the lies being told to my face, so I told myself that if I was going to try something bold, I would at least need hard evidence. I started to map out a plan regarding the phones. Update. Regrettably, the plan unfolded with unsettling success. Upon scrutinizing fabricated messages, I discovered the undeniable truth that both my wife and stepfather were engaged in an affair right under my nose. Life's cruelties found their way to me, and it was my turn to bear the consequences. I captured the damning conversations through screenshots and opted to confront them both. I arranged a modest dinner for the three of us, intending to expose them as the traitors they were, those treacherous individuals. The dinner was tense. They were unusually silent, suspecting that I was privy to more than I should be. After dessert, I initiated the conversation, asserting, "Well, I think it's time we talked. Let's address this big old elephant in the room." This prompted desperate responses from both. While Melissa appeared quizzical and confused, avoiding an objective answer, Richard seemed crestfallen, resembling a scolded child. I insisted they provide an explanation, but they continued evading for quite a while. It wasn't until I presented the evidence that they finally confessed. Here's the summary of their statements. Richard began by expressing remorse. He apologized, acknowledging that he didn't intend to hurt me. He mentioned the vulnerability and impressionability of people, emphasizing how sometimes individuals find themselves in a dark abyss. He clarified that he wasn't making excuses and acknowledged that good people can end up committing despicable acts. The conversation shifted to my mother, and I couldn't contain my anger. I interrupted him, losing my temper and almost resorting to physical violence. Melissa intervened, her interjection adding to my frustration as it was more blunt and rant-like. She discussed how our faltering marriage led Richard, with experience in the field, to assist with various issues, initially offering his point of view and later transitioning from anger. I felt nauseous, but I had to suppress it to avoid appearing weak. They attempted to justify their infidelity and claimed they would make amends, as if such damage could be repaired. I started yelling, and since the neighbors heard everything, the entire block fell into spectral silence. I'd never felt this furious, and had we not removed the knives from the table, I feared that something serious could have transpired. I document all this, understanding that anonymity prevails amid a sea of tears from everyone involved. We agreed that everyone would leave the premises independently, leaving me alone in the house that night. I wasn't certain where Melissa spent the night, but the thought of her being with Richard made me a bit anxious, though given the circumstances, I didn't consider it entirely plausible either. Update. This marked the commencement of a negative phase for me. Firstly, due to my poor emotional state, my work performance suffered, jeopardizing my job. To compound matters, rumors of infidelity circulated within and outside the offices in this small town, where any rumor becomes national news. Given that many people know me and knew my mother, knowing what happened is a profound shame. While I recognize that Melissa and Richard might be facing difficulties too, I honestly couldn't care less. Melissa attempted to contact me a couple of times by phone. It happened twice in a row, but I promptly ended both calls in anger, and afterward, she refrained from further contact. Richard's approach, however, took a different but equally unsatisfactory turn. Out of the blue, he came to the house, urging me to reconsider forgiving Melissa. He claimed she was young and impressionable, placing the blame squarely on himself. I rejected his apologies and insulted him, emphasizing that he had not only offended me, but also tarnished the memory of my mother. I made it clear that I appreciated him being in a place where he and Melissa belonged, the depths of despair. The guy started crying, and I remained indifferent, reflecting on how long they had been engaging in their actions right under my nose, which sickened me. Feeling the need to address the situation before it took a toll on my sanity, I confided in an old friend, Lola, who had introduced Melissa and me. Lola shared my outrage, even apologizing for the introduction, acknowledging the great wrong it put on me. She hadn't spoken to Melissa since and was hesitant to do so, despite their close friendship. However, she asked a rather curious question about shared assets within the marriage. We hadn't signed prenuptial agreements, a decision that seemed less than smart in hindsight, especially since Melissa initially suggested signing them. I pondered whether Melissa would be remorseful, willing to give me everything in a divorce scenario. However, my concern shifted to the house we lived in, which belongs to Melissa's family. Originally owned by her aunt, they allowed us to stay there indefinitely. I feared Melissa might remember this information and evict me. Under these circumstances, it would be miserable for her to throw me out on the street, but considering her betrayal, anything could happen. At this point, maybe the recent calls she made were just for that purpose. Update. Certain aspects of my life must progress for improvement, either forward or upward. In my case, it's a bit more specific, and it goes by the name Colombia. I arrived in Colombia a few months ago, and before delving into my experiences in the country, I want to explain why I made such a radical decision. Remember the situation with my ex-wife and stepfather? Well, following that, a little less than a year ago, I sank into a profound depression, the worst I had ever witnessed in my life. There were moments when I contemplated the most dreadful fate, self-damage. However, with the support of my friends and my psychologist, I managed to navigate through it. In discussing changes and acknowledging that I hadn't seemingly overcome my mother's grief, I recognized the need for radical changes in my life. After much meditation and a bit of introspection, I felt that establishing a new residence in the city would be counterproductive. As I mentioned, the town was pleasant but small, where everyone knows each other. So, I was encouraged to move to another city, and I did. I stayed in a nearby city for at least a couple of months, long enough for my new job to provide some valuable contacts. Among them was a coworker who recommended an international assistance website. Initially, I didn't grasp it well, but after some research, I learned that it was the equivalent of a golden opportunity. What do I mean? Well, it's a platform where people from various parts of the world can work in different countries, immersing themselves in diverse cultures and customs while remaining productive. Initially, the idea seemed somewhat whimsical, but gradually, it caught my attention. There were several places I considered: Russia, Australia, Egypt, Brazil, Romania. However, in the end, I chose Colombia. Latin America was a region rich in culture, often referred to as our neighbors to the south, as my mother used to say. Her influence, having lived there for a year in her youth, significantly impacted my decision. She described it as one of the most beautiful experiences of her life. So, why not? Alongside my job in the new city, I secured an online position that allowed me to work more flexibly from anywhere. I might as well keep working as long as I have a laptop and an internet connection. Consequently, I decided to take a significant leap and make the necessary arrangements to move to Colombia. To afford it, I sold many of my belongings and rid myself of almost everything from my marriage. Everything that belonged to me from that chapter in my life was able to leave through the metaphorical big door. I opted to stay out of the public eye for a few weeks, cutting off all contacts and ignoring communication from both Melissa and Richard, who persistently called or texted. I'm uncertain if ghosting is considered good practice, but in my case, it was the healthiest thing I could resort to without going insane. Eventually, the calls ceased, though occasionally I would receive a missed call from them. The ironic part is that it always involved a long-distance communication issue. They never agreed to show up at the door of my residence, though I doubt I would have opened it anyway. And that's how I headed to Colombia. I felt a sense of loss for my previous job, but I also considered that venturing to a place so far away, with different customs, and even a distinct national language, could bring positive changes with numerous possibilities at hand. I was a new man, ready to conquer the world. I just needed to be introduced to that world, and if only they knew that I coped quite well with the language issue. Thanks to my mother and my school Spanish classes, I managed to get through them, receiving only passing grades in all my reports. Of course, I had to refine my language skills, but within a few months, I was proficient enough to place orders at the grocery store. The job I secured involved being an assistant in a law firm, handling calls and redirecting cases. Although initially challenging due to the language barrier, it would become more bearable with the guidance of my superiors and the recurring conversation patterns. Update. I was highly preoccupied during my time in Colombia, establishing a new life. However, there are always lingering ghosts from the past. Despite thinking I had moved on from my ex-wife and stepfather, they resurfaced. Interestingly, an old friend informed me that Melissa, currently entangled in several economic conflicts, is spreading rumors that her husband abandoned her penniless abroad, living a luxurious life without fulfilling her rightful support. Contrary to her claims, we never finalized the divorce. Legally, we remain connected. She asserts I ignore her calls, portraying her destitution as the result of her supposedly wicked husband. In reality, I had nothing to do with her departure before she caused herself more damage. Surprisingly, she has embraced a more radical religious path, becoming evangelical or something similar. From what I understand, she's one of those religious individuals who criticize others while believing they're saints despite their past transgressions. She's just one of those people who believe repentance absolves them of past misdeeds, and goes further, pretending to humiliate me for her wrongs and my personal growth. What does she even get to pretend? That I should take care of her and provide everything she needs after all the damage she's done? I'm sorry, but I'm not that naive. My friend informed me that she even claimed I insulted and offended her about various personal matters. My friends countered by telling others that Melissa is fabricating lies to tarnish my reputation for something she did. All of this infuriates me. However, what keeps me most curious is that Richard does not make an appearance in any of the stories I tell. I haven't heard from him in a long time. Since I blocked him, and he wasn't much of a social networker, I saw him less. Recently, I noticed he hadn't posted anything, deepening the mystery. I thought he blocked me, but no. Many asked me about him for the same issue. I neither worry nor care about Richard. On a more positive note, I've been doing well. Initially working as a legal firm assistant, I faced challenges and ended up working at a supermarket with a demanding schedule. While the pay was good initially, the workload became overwhelming. Eventually, I climbed the corporate ladder, even becoming a branch manager, surprising many due to my short time there. Currently, I maintain a manageable schedule, allowing me time for personal pursuits on weekends. I've met a couple of girls, dated, and embraced the single life in Colombia. Despite not making significant progress in that trillion-a-guard, my social interactions remain casual. Overcoming my mother's issues is delicate, and though I feel I fell short, I strive daily to make her proud from a distance. Update. The world is a collection of coincidences, and I find myself confronted with the news of Richard's passing. It has been 3 years since our conflict unfolded, and just yesterday, I was reflecting on it in my writing. Today, a friend informed me that Richard was discovered dead in Greece. Apparently, he embarked on a personal journey, having relocated to the area long ago, adopting a lifestyle akin to mine and dedicating himself to the sea. I won't pass judgment because, as I mentioned, he followed a path similar to mine. However, I can't help but find it somewhat amusing. I acknowledge that, post-conflict, he severed ties with Melissa, leaving her abandoned as well. Rumors are circulating that Melissa is not only unfaithful, but also actively sabotaging the lives of men she's involved with, predicting that anyone connected to her will end up out of the country. From a certain perspective, it sounds almost comical, but that's not the focal point now. Yes, Richard has passed away, and his burial is scheduled for tomorrow. Some of his family members express a desire for me to attend, but they don't fully grasp my decision if I choose not to. They know me quite well, understanding it's not my place. Despite his significant faults, he was a regular person like any of us. While I don't forgive him for his actions, I can't regard everything as settled with his departure from this world. In therapy sessions, there was extensive discussion about resentment and revenge. I transitioned from harboring active hatred for these individuals to adopting a more permissive stance. I mean, it's not worth getting overly angry about it. Although Melissa's negative comments behind my back resonate with me, every story reaches a satisfying conclusion eventually. With regards to Richard's relatives, I offered my condolences and wished them success in their endeavors. They reciprocated the same for me, expressing apologies that seemed misplaced as they weren't the ones directly involved in the actions or responsible for making amends in the first place. Update. Having some free time now, after the ordeal I went through, I can finally sit down and narrate the events leading to its conclusion. First, I'll explain my absence, as my lawyer advised against revealing part of this situation until the trial concluded. And now, with the verdict delivered, I can share it all. To hell with Melissa. She is the most despicable, vile, manipulative, and conflictive being I've ever encountered. She achieved the impossible, making me wish her well to hell. In essence, all our past relationships ended with her becoming my biggest enemy after the concluded trial. Let me delve into more detail since, as I mentioned, I now have the time after 2 long months. Finally, the victor gets to tell the story. After Richard's pass away, almost all the assets he owned became Melissa's, as per his will made years ago. Amid his frenzy of spoiling Melissa during our relationship behind my back, Richard had this peculiar inclination, quote, to be part of her life in ways unknown to me, like giving her gifts or accompanying her on errands, always under the excuse of spending time with his daughter-in-law, who, during that time, audaciously put Melissa in his will. And guess what? He gave her all the assets, feeling it would be a help to her regardless of our marriage's outcome. A man's mind in the throes of passion can be a confused and erratic space. The affair began when I found out about the division of these assets, informed by one of Richard's nephews about everything that would be Melissa's property. Truth be told, Richard had quite a few things to his credit. I'm talking about cars, a couple of houses, an apartment, and even a farm outside the state. We all agreed she did not deserve it. Moreover, I was told that Richard himself had regretted his will, but let time go by during his stay in Greece, never thinking of amending it. Everyone said what he had left would be mine, and it bothered me that Melissa would just take it all. But something interesting would change everything. In the same way Richard allowed the modification of his will, not having signed the divorce with Melissa would, in theory, make the holder of 50% of his property. That's when I consulted my lawyer. I won't say his name. I'll just say he is perhaps one of the people I fear most for his intelligence. A divorce and marital dispute lawyer, one of the sharpest and shrewdest, with an almost 100% success rate. That's when I initiated a joint property settlement by marriage. Later, I learned Melissa sought my lawyer but couldn't afford him. He's not cheap, but I decided to invest my savings for a more secure outcome. That's when I learned something depressing. Melissa got into this new religion for financial convenience, doing terribly in her decision-making and fighting tooth and nail to claim everything in Richard's will. While I could have a solid basis regarding the assets, for it was clearly stipulated that she would own the whole thing, my lawyer appealed to one little detail: infidelity. Due to a violation of the marital agreement and the absence of signed prenups, there had to be an equitable distribution of assets. So we took care of that to prevent Melissa from having a chance to win. You should have seen her face when they gave the verdict. She was red as a tomato and almost regretful of everything she did. It's been a few weeks now, and the results shocked me by how grim it was. Melissa lost everything in the blink of an eye. How? No idea. My lawyer said it was amazing how someone could handle her newfound fortune so poorly, and I feel like I dodged a bullet by separating from her. Of course, the divorce was discussed right after the split, meaning she could no longer argue for my part of the deal. I admit my time in Colombia was amazing, but returning with heavy pockets is a more rewarding experience. No one speaks to Melissa nowadays, and her religious friends only speak to her out of politeness, leaving me with the moral satisfaction that eventually karma will exist for those who damaged you. Second story. Allow me to share my tale. I'm Emery, and I fell in love with Lila during our teenage years. We tied the knot at the age of 20, eagerly anticipating the beginning of our life together. However, a sense of incompleteness always lingered. I had forsaken college to work and support my young wife, yet the unfulfilled dream of completing my degree persisted in my thoughts. Determined to address this, I opted to return to school part-time and accomplish what I had started. The joy of discovering we were expecting a child added a new dimension to our lives. With impending parenthood, the pressure to complete my degree intensified. I aspired to provide the best possible future for our family. Max, our son, entered the world just as I commenced my final year of college. The schedule was demanding, working as a store stocker from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m., followed by a full-time administrative job at the police department from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Tuesdays involved classes from 5:30 p.m. to 10 p.m., and Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. It was challenging, but I remained resolute to make it succeed. Lila, employed as a nurse's aide at a local hospital, worked from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Fortunately, my mother lived a mere 10-minute drive away from our jobs and school, ensuring that Max was in good hands. Though a strenuous period, we provided unwavering support to each other throughout. Update. Over the preceding weekend, Lila and I clashed intensely. She was dissatisfied that I refused to take a break from studying to spend time with her and our son. Ongoing criticism of my work and school commitments had strained our relationship. We hadn't been in bed for 2 months, and on this specific Monday evening, tensions reached a breaking point. Amid fact-checking a research paper I completed over the weekend, due the following Tuesday evening, Lila provoked fights and created a scene. Frustrated, I told her to shut up and quit acting like a child. Her unexpected response stunned me. Looking me in the eye, she declared, "I hate you, and I'm in love with someone else." In complete shock, we argued for hours until Lila finally admitted the truth. She had been emotionally involved with a janitor at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide. Unbelievably, what began innocently with compliments and lunch dates in the cafeteria escalated quickly. She was bad-mouthing me and even kissing this guy behind my back. This revelation shattered me. My world crumbled, and I couldn't comprehend how the woman I loved betrayed me in such a way. I felt like my entire life was a lie. Deciding to leave, I returned to the living room with my suitcase, walked past her without a word. Despite her taunts and questions like, "Running back to mommy?" I set the suitcase in the driveway, went back inside and fetched her purse. Holding it out to her, I instructed her to leave. Stunned, she refused. So I gently picked her up, threw her over my shoulder, and carried her outside to the hood of the car. She was too shocked to resist as I went back inside, locked the door, and held the deadbolt firmly. Despite her attempts to re-enter, she eventually left to stay at her parents' place, informing them of our separation without revealing the real reason. That night felt endless, and I had to inform both my jobs of a family emergency, resulting in my absence the next day. Exhaustion overcame me, and I eventually drifted off to sleep. Update. I woke up at 7 this morning, my mind already consumed with thoughts of minimizing contact with Lila, my soon-to-be ex-wife. The situation between us had been escalating, and I knew I needed to act swiftly before things got messier. I called my mother to ask if she could watch our son for the day, but she sounded worried, questioning why the boy wasn't with us already. After dropping off my son at my mother's, I went directly to the office of a lawyer friend of my family, Mr. Douglas. Having known him well and trusted him since he went to school with my father, I explained the situation and asked for his help in filing for divorce as soon as possible. Mr. Douglas patiently listened and suggested I take some time to think it over, but I was resolute. I wanted to complete the divorce papers that day. He agreed to help, assuring they would be ready by day's end. I promised to pick them up and file them with the clerk's office myself. Leaving the office, a sense of relief washed over me. Finally, I was taking control of my life and making the decisions I needed to make. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to see it through. I went to work, returned home, showered, and had breakfast with my son and sister. Later that day, Lila called, seeking arrangements to see our son. She was angry and confrontational, insisting on taking our son for the weekend. I refused, suggesting we meet on Sunday at a local park. Lila hung up on me. Heading to work at the police department, I couldn't shake the unease from my conversation with Lila. I decided to take action, going to the clerk's office to file for divorce. Later that day, a coworker informed me the papers were ready to be served to Lila at her workplace. I called a deputy I knew and asked him to serve the papers to Lila at work, and he agreed to do so the next day. Lila returned to work after our phone call, and her janitor chatted with her throughout the day. They couldn't have lunch or meet that evening because he claimed he had to attend something with one of his kids. Lila, under the impression he was divorced with 3 children, went to her parents' house after work. Later that night, she called me 3 times, but I hung up each time I realized it was her calling. One day around noon, Mr. Douglas entered the nurse's station and asked for Lila. When she came forward, he loudly declared, "Mrs. Lila, you are being sued for divorce due to infidelity." Shocked, Lila fell to the ground, and the hall supervisor, Alex, rushed to her aid. Lila was engulfed by a wave of shame and guilt as the gravity of her actions dawned on her. She understood that Emery would never forgive her, unable to fathom how she had allowed it all to unfold. Mr. Douglas lifted her into a chair, and despite Alex's attempts to calm her, it took a while for her to regain composure. My wife, nearing the end of her shift, received a call to meet the hospital administrator in her office, leaving her terrified, fearing her outburst had been reported. Upon entering the administrator's office, the door abruptly slammed shut, and she was promptly fired. Imagine the look on her face. Priceless! They instructed her not to return to the property. I guess she won't be mixing business with pleasure anymore, huh? To add to it, her final paycheck would be mailed to her. As it turned out, someone had witnessed the affair in the parking lot and reported it. The news of the divorce papers had circulated around the hospital, leading to the janitor being fired and escorted off the property an hour earlier. The scandal's news spread like wildfire within the hospital, leaving my wife feeling as if everyone knew. She left the hospital, heading straight to her parents' house, revealing only our separation without providing details. I sat at the dinner table with my son, savoring a tranquil evening at home. Reflecting on the day's events, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The deputy had informed me of my wife's infidelity and her subsequent firing from the hospital. I must admit, hearing about the janitor's termination was also quite satisfying, given his involvement in the scandal. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, interrupting my thoughts. I got up to answer it, greeted by a heavily pregnant woman struggling to stand. She sought my wife Lila, but I informed her that Lila no longer lived with me. Confirming I was Lila's husband and had served her with divorce papers earlier that day, the woman, the janitor's wife, explained the hospital incident. Horrified by the details of my wife's affair and the undisclosed house, I wished I could have taken action against him. She asked me where Lila was, and I told her she was with her parents. After assuring me she only wanted to talk to Lila and reveal the truth, she asked for directions to Lila's parents' house. Before leaving, the woman also complimented me on my parenting skills, acknowledging me as a wonderful father to my son still at the table. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness and betrayal. However, as a man, I knew I had to be strong for my son and move forward with the divorce. Update. It transpired that my wife, Lila, was entangled in a disturbing game orchestrated by the janitor and his associates. They maintained a tally, aiming to bed as many married women as possible within a mere 90 days. Lila became the janitor's third conquest, and shockingly, he engaged with a fourth woman on the same night he had an encounter with one of his children. I was repulsed and infuriated by what I had learned. The house mentioned was, in reality, a rented space where these men took the women they were involved with. When the janitor's wife discovered the truth, he returned home under the influence, tearfully confessing in an attempt to reconcile. Lila was astonished upon learning about it, and the janitor's wife confronted her, recounting how she witnessed me caring for our son alone because Lila was acting selfish and foolish. Lila lost control, breaking into tears, while the janitor's wife walked away, leaving her in a catatonic state. My in-laws checked on her after hearing the car depart. She was practically unresponsive. They brought her inside, contemplating whether to take her to the emergency room when she began to speak incoherently. My father-in-law suspected she might be on some form of stimulant. My father-in-law, a good man hurt by the entire situation, couldn't fathom his daughter cheating on her husband. Conversely, my mother-in-law, as always, placed blame on me for the entire ordeal. I couldn't tolerate my mother-in-law and was relieved to be free of her. It was a challenging circumstance, but as a man, I recognized the need to care for my son and move beyond this chaos. I experienced hurt and anger, yet I also felt a sense of relief in finally uncovering the truth. It marked the beginning of my journey to healing from the betrayal inflicted upon me. Update. Later that day, Lila's father called to update me, expressing concern that she remained unresponsive, neglecting personal care, and raising safety fears. Shockingly, he had the audacity to suggest I visit her. Seriously? I couldn't care less about her. After her betrayal, cheating, and shattering of my trust, I couldn't muster an ounce of sympathy. She created her problems, and now she can deal with them. Without a second thought, I rejected his plea. I had no interest in seeing her or getting entangled in her mess. Good riddance. I advised Lila's father to seek help for her and assured him that I'd permit her to see our son once she pulled herself together. It was a tough decision, but I recognized the need to prioritize my son's well-being over Lila's at that point. Hopefully, Lila would seek the necessary assistance, and we could eventually co-parent our son in a healthy manner. But for the time being, I needed to focus on moving forward and tending to my own mental and emotional health. While at work, Lila called, seeking a meeting to see our son. I probed her stability to ensure she wouldn't upset him, and she confirmed that she was stable. I agreed to meet her and her father at 9 a.m. in the park on Saturday, but I insisted my mother come along. I wasn't comfortable meeting Lila alone. Upon seeing her, I decided to limit their contact to 2 hours. She appeared disheveled, having lost a significant amount of weight and devoid of makeup. Instead, she smelled of ivory soap, devoid of the feminine scents I associated with her. Later, I discovered her mother had bathed and dressed her as she couldn't function properly. We continued park meetings for 3 weeks, extending the visits to 4 hours and including Sundays. Although she appeared to be improving each week, I remained concerned about her mental well-being, forbidding her from being alone with our son or keeping him overnight. My mother-in-law eventually grew tired of this arrangement and hired a lawyer to sue for custody. However, since Lila hadn't signed the divorce papers, and I was fine waiting to file for divorce in 6 months, her custody lawsuit infuriated me, especially as she sought full custody. I had earlier informed her father of my willingness to eventually split custody 50-50, a notion rejected by her mother. In retaliation, I sought full custody on the grounds of mental incapacity. Update. Seated in the courtroom, my heart pounded in my chest. Across from me, Lila sat calmly, her lawyer by her side. It was challenging to believe that we were here, embroiled in a custody battle for our son. A year ago, we had been a happy family, or so I thought. But now, everything had changed. Lila's lawyer stood up, presenting her case to the judge. She spoke about how Lila was a loving mother, unjustly deprived of her parental rights. She argued that Lila had taken steps to enhance her mental health and was dedicated to our son's well-being. She requested the court to grant Lila full custody of our child. My lawyer rose to counter her arguments, informing the judge of my serious concerns about Lila's mental stability. He presented evidence suggesting she was still grappling with her condition and might not be fit for full-time care of our child. He asked the court to grant me full custody. The judge listened to both sides and then called for a recess to consider his decision. I left the courtroom, feeling overwhelmed and anxious. Leaning against the wall, attempting to calm myself, Lila's father approached. A source of support since the divorce, I was grateful for his presence. He expressed his concern about the situation and informed me that Lila was making progress with therapy and medication. Apparently, she was genuinely committed to getting better. Feeling uncertain, I admitted my dilemma, stating my desire for what's best for our son, while expressing a lack of trust in Lila's ability to care for him independently. Lila's father understood my concerns and suggested working out a joint custody arrangement so that our son could have both parents in his life. After a moment's consideration, I agreed to the idea. Returning to the courtroom, the judge granted joint custody to both Lila and me, with the condition that Lila continue her mental health treatment. Exiting the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try and make it work for the sake of my son. Looking up at the sky, I whispered a silent prayer, hoping that things would improve from this point onward. Update. Lila approached me with a proposition, the idea that we should reconcile and move back in together to try and mend our relationship. As I stood there, gazing at Lila in disbelief, she continued to present her case, attempting to justify her actions and persuade me to take her back. However, her words failed to resonate with me. I could sense anger welling up inside, ready to erupt like a volcano. Without hesitation, I abruptly shut the door in her face. The audacity she displayed by showing up at my door after causing me so much pain was unbelievable. My heart was still recovering from the wound she had inflicted, and she had the nerve to suggest giving our relationship another chance? It was absurd. As the door closed, I took a deep breath and turned around to find Amber witnessing the entire scene. Oh yes, I've discovered someone who surpasses Lila by 1,000,000 times. Her name's Amber, and she's an absolute rock star. We connected instantly, sparking like fireworks on the 4th of July. Her eyes conveyed empathy and support, and I felt a surge of gratitude towards her. She had been my pillar of strength throughout the ordeal with Lila, and I couldn't envision going through it without her. Amber enveloped me in her arms, offering comfort as I vented my frustrations. She assured me that I had made the right choice and deserved better than someone who had hurt me so deeply. Her presence was soothing, and I felt a renewed determination to move forward and leave the past behind. In the following days, my focus shifted to building a future with Amber. We spent time together, creating memories and embarking on new adventures. Her positivity and zest for life were contagious, and I found myself smiling and laughing more than I had in a long time. With her by my side, the pain of Lila's betrayal gradually faded, and I began to heal. Meanwhile, Lila persisted in attempting to reach out to me, but my decision was firm. I had severed ties with her toxic drama and empty promises. She remained a distant memory, a lesson learned, and a chapter closed in my life. With Amber, I was moving forward. Life was too short to dwell on the past, and I was determined to make the most of every moment with the woman who had captured my heart. With Amber, I had discovered true happiness, and I was prepared to embrace the incredible future that awaited. Cheers!
Story 3.
My sister and I graduated high school at the same time, but our parents took her to Hawaii to celebrate while I was left home alone, and that's not even the worst part. So, for context, a few weeks ago, my sister and I graduated from high school, and in the fall, we'll be leaving for college. Alex is my twin sister, and I have to admit, she's always been better than me academically. I've never really been one for books and have been more interested in sports. I bagged a football scholarship recently, and I think it's a pretty big deal, but my parents only cared about the fact that Alex was valedictorian, and they took her to Hawaii to celebrate. While I only received a card saying, "Congratulations." And now they actually expect me to share the gift that I received from another member of the family with her because she's throwing tantrums. So, the day after we graduated, my parents asked her what she wanted as a gift, and they would get it for her because she had earned it. This conversation took place right in front of me, and they did not bother to ask me anything, which was not surprising because they had always been partial towards Alex. Then she thought about it for a few minutes and said that she wanted them to take her and a couple of her friends to Hawaii as a gift. My parents agreed instantly, and Alex went to her room to celebrate and tell her friends. While she was in her room, I asked my parents if I was going to go with them or not because I was honestly not sure. Usually when we are on family vacations, they do take me with them, but since this was a gift for Alex, I wasn't sure if my presence was required or was going to be appreciated by Alex. Because she doesn't really like me much, and I'm fine with that. I'm not really a fan of her either because, even though we are twins, she's very different from me. She's spoiled, arrogant, and is mostly really disrespectful to everyone, and nobody who went to school with us likes her. It's just her gang of cronies who seem to think she's perfect, but I think it's just because they are just like her as well. Anyway, when I asked my parents if I would be coming along with them, they had to think about it for a while, and I instantly knew that the answer would be no because if they had to think about it, it couldn't be because they were willing to take me with them. They had probably already decided against it and were just thinking of a way to tell me. After a few seconds, my mother spoke to me and said that since this is a gift for Alex, it would be unfair to take me with them because then it would just become a family vacation. I pointed out the obvious that my parents were going along with her, but they said that they were only going with her because Alex wanted it. And they were pretty sure that she wouldn't want me because even they were aware of the fact that we didn't really get along. After that was made clear to me, there was nothing more to say, so I went back to my room, and I just felt bad for myself because, even though I have not achieved anything great academically, I think a football scholarship was worth a celebration as well. But my parents did not seem to care about me or my achievements. And on top of that, they were willing to leave me home alone for the entire week while they were gone. And Alex would get to celebrate with her friends in Hawaii. I was miserable for one full day until I realized that my family being gone for 1 week would mean that I would have the house to myself and could do whatever I wanted. So that made me feel a little less upset, and I decided I was going to make the best of the situation. While they were preparing for the trip, it felt like everyone had completely forgotten about me, and that was not a feeling that I was exactly unfamiliar with, but it really stung. On the day that they were leaving, my parents told me to take good care of the house, and at least they said goodbye to me. But my sister did not even glance at me and just laughed. None of this was surprising behavior coming from her, so you guys can imagine how bad my relationship with her is. For the first couple of days, I just invited my friends over, and we played video games, had a bunch of junk food, and just did whatever we felt like, right from the morning until the evening when they had to go home. And this was my plan for every day. On the final day, I was going to call my friends and tell them that they were free to come over that day as well, but at around 8:00 in the morning, I heard the doorbell ringing. And it was way too early for my friends to show up. I hadn't woken up properly yet either because I had been sleeping in late ever since I graduated from high school. So, when I went downstairs and looked outside the window to see who it was, I was kind of shocked to see my mother standing there. It took me a few minutes to remind myself that my mother was not here, she was with the rest of the family in Hawaii, and this must be somebody else. Then I noticed a couple of differences as well, like this woman who was standing outside the door was much taller than my mother. She also looked kind of younger, and she had blonde highlights in her hair, and my mom hated that. So I was able to gather that this was definitely not my mom, but someone who looked weirdly similar to her. I decided to open the door after contemplating it for a bit because, if she looked similar to my mother, it meant that she must be a relative of some sort. When I opened the door, she introduced herself as my mom's cousin and said that she had been living in the UK for the past 20 years, so I had probably never seen her before. From what I knew, my mother did not have any siblings, and she was an only child, and this woman looked like she was just a couple of years younger than my mother. So I had guessed already that she must have been a cousin, but for a cousin to look that similar to my mom, it was just weird, and I definitely hadn't ever heard of my mom talking about some cousin from the UK. But then again, I don't really speak to my mother that often anyway. I invited her in, but I made sure to tell her that my parents were not home because I was certain that she had come to see them and not me. To my surprise, she told me that that was fine because she hadn't come to see them, she had actually come to see me and my sister. That was another shock for me because I couldn't imagine what she wanted to do with me and my sister. But anyway, I had to tell her that I was the only person who was home when my sister was away. She seemed a bit upset when I said that and asked me where the rest of them were. So I decided to be honest with her because her face just seemed like she could be trusted, and I told her the truth. Like most other people, she was also shocked when she found out that my family had left me back home alone and had taken a trip to Hawaii with my sister to celebrate her high school graduation, even though I had also graduated at the same time. I kind of tried to downplay how terrible I had felt because I didn't want to make it seem like I was complaining to her, since I didn't want my mother to yell at me for spilling the beans about our family to her cousin when they came back. She told me how sorry she was and said that she could understand how I felt, so she wanted to give me a gift. Then she took out her checkbook from her purse and wrote me a check, but asked me to fill in the amount. This was the first time that anything like this had ever happened, and I was shocked. So I told her that I couldn't let her do that because I just couldn't accept money from her. We went back and forth on that for a couple of minutes, and then she just said that she was going to fill in the amount that she wanted to give me and wrote me a check for $50,000. I insisted that I couldn't accept that from her because it was a huge amount, something that I couldn't even imagine. But she told me that she just wasn't going to hear it, and I had to accept it. She said that it was the least she could do for me, and honestly, I still don't know what it means, but in the end, she forced me to accept the check. Then we spoke a bit about my family and how everyone else was doing, but I could tell that her mind was elsewhere, and she was definitely not listening to me. After about half an hour, she told me that she had to leave and said that she hoped to meet me soon enough again. Once she had left, I realized that it had been a very weird meeting, and her behavior had been extremely off-putting. I also couldn't shake off the feeling that she had been lying about being my mom's cousin because cousins definitely do not look that similar to each other. Or maybe they do sometimes, but I just got this feeling, and I still do, that my mom has a sister that none of us know about, and that's why she had to lie to me about being my mom's cousin. I know it's crazy, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but that woman was the spitting image of my mother, and I could just feel it. But now, coming to the part where I kind of messed up, it was really careless of me, but I was so put off by that meeting with the woman that I forgot about the check. I left it there on the coffee table under a bunch of letters that had arrived for my parents during that week. Then my friends came over, and we had a bit of a party with a couple of other people as well, so I completely forgot about that check. The next morning, my family came back from Hawaii, and everyone was in a celebratory mood, apart from me, obviously. A couple of minutes after they had come back home, my parents started going through their mail, and at the very bottom of it, they found that check. I am incredibly lucky that I was standing right there, and I was able to snatch it out of my father's hands as soon as he saw it. But it was a tad bit too late because he had realized that it had been a check addressed to me and started asking a bunch of questions about it. Which I don't really blame him for, because if someone writes your son a check for $50,000, you definitely do want to ask questions about it. After they had found out about the check, I knew that there was no point in hiding anything, and I told them about the woman who had visited, the conversation that we had, and that she had written me that check because she wanted to, and I was going to deposit the check soon enough. One very interesting thing that happened while I was telling everyone about the visitor, I could see that my parents started looking very nervous. And I'm not even kidding when I say that the color literally drained out of their faces. It was very obvious because they had come back from Hawaii all tanned, and all of a sudden, they started to look pale and sweaty. I was about to ask my mother, who on earth was this cousin from the UK, because I could tell there was something that both of them were hiding from us, but before I could do that, thanks to my bratty sister, the conversation was completely derailed. She cannot live without making everything about her, so she obviously picked that very moment to start complaining about how the check had been addressed to only me, and said that I should have spoken to that aunt and told her to make it out to both of us instead of just me. I told her that this woman had known about both of us. She had chosen to address the check to just me on purpose, and then I tried to go back to speaking to my parents. But all three of them started talking about the check instead. It was a clear attempt to change the topic of conversation, and it worked because my parents started encouraging my sister to fight with me. And she fell for the bait. Alex eventually started screaming at me to get my attention, and said that this was very unfair, and that I would have to split the amount with her. That got my attention, and I told her that there was no way on earth that that was going to happen because she had already received her gift. She wanted a trip to Hawaii with her friends, and that's what she had gotten, and now this was my gift. So, I'm not obliged to share it with her, just like she was not obliged to take me with her to Hawaii. I thought it was a fair enough statement, but my parents started egging her on and said that if my aunt had come to visit us, she had obviously intended to give us both a gift. But they implied that I must have played the victim card in front of her, and out of pity, she wrote me the check since I must have painted the rest of my family out to be the villains. Alex bought that story, and honestly, I didn't really have to play the victim card because I definitely was a victim here. I was the victim of a terrible family, and I don't know whether that woman wrote the check out of pity or not, but it had been addressed to me, and I was not going to share it with anyone. So obviously, that led to a huge fight, and my parents were encouraging my sister to be even more delusional and entitled throughout the conversation. Maybe she was not clever enough to catch on to what they were trying to do, but I could understand that they were just trying to distract us from thinking about our aunt. And I was getting really pissed off because all of them were being ridiculous. Eventually, my mother told me that I was not going to be living with them anymore if I refused to share that money with my sister, and that's when I just totally lost it. I started yelling like a crazy person, which I usually try to avoid because I don't want to be on the same level as my family, but I just couldn't control myself. I told them that I knew my rights, and I was not going anywhere, and neither was I sharing the money with her. To be honest, I don't really know if there are any laws to prevent that, but I'm sure that after my outburst, they definitely won't be coming after me anytime soon. I also called my parents the biggest liars because I was sure that they were hiding something from both of us. And I couldn't believe that they were trying to get us to fight with each other so that we would forget about the visitor. Then I stormed up to my room so I could calm down, threw a bunch of stuff around, and eventually, I was able to get myself under control. Since then, nobody in the family has spoken to me, and even at mealtimes, my mother brings the food up to me and leaves without a word. I feel like a prisoner in my own house, and I honestly felt like running away last night. The only person who has said anything to me so far was Alex, but even she was just looking out for herself. She came to my room this morning and said that all of this could have been avoided if I had just agreed to split the money with her and stopped bugging my parents about our aunt when I could see that they didn't want to talk about it. And now I don't have anybody to blame apart from myself for the hole I've dug myself into. After having said that, she laughed, and I thought that she was the most selfish person ever. But then I started thinking about a lot of things. Maybe I have been acting just like her. $50,000 is a huge amount. Splitting it with her was not going to harm me or whatever, but I just wanted it all to myself. And I also feel like I might have read too much into the situation with my aunt. But at the same time, their reaction was too suspicious not to take note of, and I feel like I'm losing my mind right now. I just have so many mixed emotions about everything that I don't even know what I'm so upset about. So I really need to ask, do you guys think that there was anything suspicious about the way my parents reacted to the news of my aunt visiting? And more importantly, AITA for refusing to split the $50,000 with my sister? Update 1. Hi guys, first of all, thank you so very much for all the responses and comments on my post. Never in my life had I imagined that so many people could have something to say to me and would take time out of their lives to actually give me advice on such a situation. It also feels very comforting to know that there are more people like me out there, so thanks for that. I guess I was a bit all over the place in my original post, but I would honestly blame that on the kind of situation that I'm in. But anyway, I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet this time. So first things first, I have decided to move out of my parents' house. I thought about it long and hard. They want this, and I definitely want it. I never left home because I thought it would be taking things too far, but this time it's my parents who have taken it too far. I have never gotten along with them, nor have I ever gotten along with my sister. I just don't see the point in staying with them anymore, so I have decided that I'm going to live with a friend of mine until college starts. His parents very kindly agreed to let me live with them for free, even though I offered to pay rent to them. The bottom line is, I'm getting out of here, and obviously, I'm keeping all the money. All things said and done, the check has been made out to me and just me. I'm not obliged to share that kind of money with anyone, least of all my sister. If they hadn't left me at home by myself while they went off on vacation, I probably wouldn't even have met my aunt. And neither would I have received that kind of money. So, in a way, they are responsible for this. She has never treated me with kindness or respect, so it's very stupid of her to expect me to share the money with her now. And I'm sure that my parents will always take care of her. Can't say the same thing for myself, though, so I definitely need the money more than she does. I don't even know why I was considering splitting it with her or having second thoughts about whether I was doing the right thing. I guess I was just too emotional, but I have thought about it, and I don't need to feel sorry for what I'm doing. They never have, and it's fair enough for me to act just like them. It has been 3 days since my post, and I've been packing everything up. Tomorrow, around the afternoon, my friend's dad will be here with his pickup truck, and I will be gone, and I really just can't wait. Update 2. So, a lot of things have changed in my life since my last update. It's crazy to think that it was only 4 days back. I don't even know where to start, but I guess a good place to pick up would be where I left off. So, I said that I was going to move out of my parents' home, and I did that the day after I made that post. My friend's father was here to pick me up, and he helped me move all my things. Obviously, I did not have to take any furniture with me. It was just a bunch of boxes. My parents saw all of that happening, but did not ask any questions. Alex did not even bother to come out of her room. She just popped out once, saw what was going on, and then went back inside. After we had moved the last of the boxes, I was about to leave without even saying goodbye because I was sure that nobody really cared about it. But before I was able to walk out of the door, my mother stopped me and asked me where I thought I was going. So I told her that, for the past couple of days, nobody in the family had spoken to me, and everybody liked to pretend that I did not even exist. Now they did not have to pretend anymore. They could fully be themselves around the house and forget about me in the true sense because I was moving out. It shouldn't come as a shock to them because she herself had said that if I did not share the money with my sister, I would not have a place in this house anymore. Since I had decided that I was not going to be sharing the money with anyone, I thought it was better for me to leave on my own rather than be kicked out. My parents told me that I was being stupid, and that this arrogance of mine would wear off once I had realized that $50,000 was not enough to last in the world on my own. I just ignored that, and I walked out, and they did not try to talk to me any further. My friend's father, funnily enough, was a lot more compassionate than my own parents, and told me that everything was going to be fine on the drive to his house. There, they set me up in the guest room, and that's where I've been staying. My friend has always been a great stand-up guy, and his family is the reason why. They're all just kind and sweet, and looking at them, I realize that this is how families are supposed to be, so I'm happy to be living with them until it's time for me to leave for college. But that was not all that happened over the past couple of days. I was also able to find out the truth behind the visitor that we had, and I'm still struggling to come to terms with it. I think I had mentioned several times that the woman who had visited us looked uncannily similar to my mother, and I had already suspected that she might have been a sister that we did not know about. And I guess I was right because last evening, she reached out to me on social media and told me a bunch of things that I honestly don't know what to think about. Apparently, she's my mom's youngest sister, but she had been cast out of the family because she got pregnant when she was 19. And, well, you guys can probably already guess who her kids are. Yeah, it's us. Alex and I are her children, but because she was just 19 and still in college, her parents forced her to give us up for adoption. And around the same time, my parents had started trying for a baby but were struggling with conception. After one family meeting, it was decided that my mother would adopt her children, but the catch was that my parents only wanted one kid, and they wanted a girl child. And that's when my biological mother put her foot down and said that both her children were going to go to the same set of parents. She was not going to separate us. My grandparents convinced my parents to adopt us both. For the first couple of months after our adoption, my birth mother kept visiting us both. But I guess my mom was not fine with it anymore and told her parents that she wanted her to stop visiting. My mother claimed that it was going to confuse us to have two maternal figures growing up, and said that it would be for the best for her to stay away from our family until my mother was fine with having her over. My grandparents decided that my mother was right, so they told my biological mother to stay away until my mom was ready to allow her to have a relationship with us. That led to a massive fight, and they did not speak for several years. Finally, she got back in touch with her parents at the beginning of this year, and I guess my grandparents have had a change of heart. So they gave her our address, and that's how she visited us both. Alex and I are 18 now, so she thought it was going to be the perfect time to start building a relationship with us, and maybe eventually she would be able to tell us the truth. But after she had met me and realized how I was being treated by my family, she realized that she had made a mistake by allowing my mother to adopt her children. Especially when it had been made obvious to her that my mother was only interested in raising her daughter. So she definitely had adopted both of us, but she had only accepted Alex and not me. And she felt responsible for this. So she reached out to me and felt like it was her duty to tell me the truth because nobody else was going to. Several hours have passed since then, and I still haven't been able to come to terms with it. I don't even know what to think about it, and I haven't told anyone, not even my friend, who I'm living with right now. Typing it out here has helped me at least say it out loud once, but I still don't know what to do with this information. I haven't responded to her message, but she can see that I have read it. I guess it explains a lot of things. But God, I don't even know what to feel anymore. I'm just numb and confused and lost. But anyway, it's not like the world has stopped turning because of this revelation, and I'm going to have to do something about it eventually. I just don't know what, but I'll figure something out, and I'm sure that the comments here will be helpful as well. Update 3. Hey, so 2 weeks have passed since I received that message from my mother. To be honest, I'm not really sure what to call her yet. She had introduced herself as someone who was supposed to be my aunt, but now she's my mother all of a sudden. Also, I have to say that even she is a better mother than the one who raised me. Anyway, I took my own sweet time to respond to her message, and I texted her back just 3 days ago. I told her that there was a lot to discuss, so I would want to meet in person, but I was open to having a relationship with her. I had already lost the family that I thought I had. It couldn't hurt to give her a chance. Everyone screwed up, and she screwed up when she was 19. I can't hold that against her. I haven't told Alex about it yet because I don't think it's my place to say anything. I think our mother has to tell her the truth. Now, which mother tells her the truth, that I don't know. All I know is that in a couple of days I'm going to be meeting with my biological mom and we are going to try and fix our relationship because she's back for good and isn't going anywhere anymore. I'm actually kind of looking forward to it. I just hope it goes well. Keeping my fingers crossed.
Story 4. When I first met Penny, it was during a summer volunteer program at a local hospital. She was a student nurse then, and her dedication caught my attention long before her smile did. I was a budding architect working on a side project for the hospital's expansion, and fate had us crossing paths in the break room one afternoon. She laughed at my clumsy attempt to reach the top shelf for a mug and offered to help, instantly disarming me with her warmth. Our early days together were a whirlwind of late-night phone calls and shared dreams. She wanted to make a difference in pediatric care, and I dreamed of designing homes that brought joy to families. We supported each other through those years of hard work and limited resources, often sharing meals of instant noodles and making do with thrift store finds for furniture. Despite the struggles, we were happy just being together. Our first major hurdle came when Penny's father fell seriously ill. Balancing her studies and part-time work with caring for him put immense strain on her, and I did what I could to lighten the load. It was during this period that I saw her resilience and compassion in full force, qualities that deepened my love for her. We became each other's pillars of strength, and those challenging months solidified our bond. Marriage followed not long after graduation, and we found joy in building a life together, even as the responsibilities piled up. Our first child arrived 3 years later, and I can still recall how Penny's face lit up when she held him for the first time. Over the years, she juggled her nursing career and motherhood with a grace I admired, even if it often left her drained. By the time our youngest was born, the cracks in our seemingly perfect life began to show. Penny put her dreams of advancing her career on hold, prioritizing our children's needs and the financial challenges we faced. I focused on work to keep us afloat, and though we remained close, the stresses of daily life often left little room for the romance and connection we once shared. Now, with the children grown and gone, I'd envisioned a new chapter, a chance to rekindle what we'd lost amid the chaos. I wanted us to reclaim the passion and partnership that had once defined our relationship. Little did I know that the journey ahead would test us in ways I could never have foreseen. Penny and I have been together for almost 3 decades, and this past year marked a significant turning point for us. Our youngest left for college, officially transitioning us into the phase of being empty nesters. I saw it as an opportunity to deepen our connection and nurture the parts of our relationship that had taken a back seat during our years of raising children. Our home, though small, didn't offer much in the way of privacy, but I had a plan to reignite the romance. After we dropped off our daughter, I swept Penny into my arms and carried her upstairs, laughing off her light-hearted objections about needing a shower after the drive. The evening was passionate, and her enthusiasm sparked a sense of optimism in me about this new chapter of our lives. At 48, Penny's charm hadn't faded, and my love for her remained steadfast. Penny has been a nurse since we met, though life, 3 kids, financial stress, and endless responsibilities kept her from advancing in her career. Frustration about being stuck in the same role while younger nurses climbed the ranks often left her visibly upset. After what I thought was a great night, Penny surprised me with a bold announcement. She had been planning to join a 6-month pediatric nursing training program. "The hospital needs pediatric nurses," she explained. "After training, I could specialize, and in a few years I might even lead the department or become matron. It'll help us save more for retirement by 60. I was stunned, both by her determination and the fact that she had planned this without telling me. "Why didn't you share this earlier?" I asked, feeling blindsided. Her response floored me further. "The program is out of state, an hour by car, 3 by flight. I'll be gone for 6 months. 6 months? I repeated, shocked. That's a long time. Isn't there another option? No, this is the only one. It's not that long in the big picture, Mike, she said, adding that couples endure far longer separations. I can fly home monthly, or you can visit me. I struggled to process it all. As I voiced my concerns, Penny cut me off. Don't be selfish, Mike. Selfish? I've always supported you and the kids, I replied, hurt. Her anger didn't waver. If this were your dream, I'd be expected to cheer you on. But because it's mine, it's selfish. I never said that, I countered. I just need time to process. You've had months, I've had minutes. Her tone softened as she explained that housing would be covered, and while frequent visits might not be practical, I could come once a month. Her passion was inspiring, but the suddenness left me reeling. Her reasoning seemed logical, but the gap between my hopes for this new phase of our lives and her plan left me reeling. I felt off balance, and that vulnerability left me open to persuasion. Penny leaned in, kissing my neck and seducing me into a second round of closeness. Let's face it, any man in my shoes would have been hard-pressed to resist. In the heat of the moment, I agreed to her plan. Then she dropped the final surprise. The course starts next week, she said casually as she packed her bags. I stared at her, stunned. Next week? You already agreed, she reminded me, leaving no room for debate. And just like that, she was gone, her excitement bubbling over as though she were a kid heading off to summer camp. She was so thrilled, she almost forgot to kiss me goodbye. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been swept aside, my questions and concerns drowned in her whirlwind of enthusiasm. I have to admit, adjusting to a new daily routine wasn't easy for me. For years, I never gave much thought to how I'd spend my free time. Penny had always been the one who managed our social calendar. As long as she included me in the plans, I was content to let her take charge of that part of our lives. I know I'm not alone in this. Most of the guys I work with would say the same about their wives. Penny's evenings and weekends were often packed with activities she planned for the two of us, aside from the family responsibilities. Meanwhile, I handled the essential chores, mowing the lawn, washing the cars, and driving the kids to sports practices and games. But now, with her gone, my evenings stretched into long hours of loneliness and boredom. It wasn't that we'd been particularly adventurous or social before, but even the simple routines we had shared, like laughing at TV shows or talking about the news, were missing. I even found myself missing her habit of rubbing her feet while we relaxed together. During the first week of Penny's absence, we talked on the phone for about half an hour each evening. I couldn't help but wonder if she had factored in the rising phone bill when she budgeted for this new phase of her life. More than that, I found myself feeling envious. She was obviously thriving in her new environment, excited and fully immersed in the challenges she was facing. Our conversations revolved around her updates. Her enthusiasm was undeniable, and she often spoke of new people whose names meant nothing to me. It left me feeling excluded, as though I no longer had a place in this chapter of her life. Still, the calls ended warmly, leaving me hopeful that this temporary separation might deepen our connection when she returned. By the second week, our nightly chats had shrunk to about 20 minutes. Penny explained, "Mike, I need to stay focused. These calls pull me out of my studying mindset." Her words stung. I felt like I had been relegated to the role of an interruption. I tried to keep the conversations positive and loving, but by the end of the week, they started to feel one-sided. Despite my frustrations, I stayed supportive, keeping my loneliness to myself. By the third week, Penny suggested we talk every other evening instead of daily. "I'll call you, Mike," she said. "That way I can make sure it's a good time." Her calls became less frequent, and by the fourth week, they dwindled to just 2. She had her first major assignment and was working evening shifts, and I tried to be understanding. Still, it was hard. I missed her. I missed us. I'd planned to visit her that weekend, but fate had other ideas. Penny called to cancel my trip. "There's a flu outbreak, Mike. The hospital's overwhelmed and it wouldn't be safe. Besides, I won't have any time to spend with you." Disappointed, I resolved to make the best of the weekend. While stopping for gas, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. He invited me to join his poker group, which met every Saturday night at the local pub. Feeling tired of my routine and missing Penny's presence, I decided to go. The evening was enjoyable. We played cards in a back room before heading to the bar for drinks. After years of family-friendly outings, neighborhood cookouts, and kid-oriented activities, the pub was a revelation. I was surprised by the number of single women around my age, or slightly younger, who approached me with bold confidence. Some were unmistakably trying to pick me up. It was startling how after so many years of marriage, I had forgotten that these encounters still happened in bars. It took me a few weeks to notice a pattern. On nights when Penny didn't call, I found myself at the pub. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, but as the visits became more frequent, it was hard to ignore. One evening, I turned to my friend Jeff and asked, "What's going on here?" Jeff laughed. "Mike, are you really that clueless? Haven't you noticed? At our age, there are way more single women than single men. This place is full of widows, divorcees, and women whose husbands traded them in for younger models." "But why are they approaching me?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. Jeff smirked. "Look at yourself. You're fit, thanks to your job. You've still got your looks, and you're not weighed down by kids or an angry wife. If you took off that wedding ring, half the women here would be lining up to take you home tonight. No fancy lines, no drinks required." I glanced around and noticed the attention I had been oblivious to before. Jeff followed my gaze and continued. "Don't get me wrong. I know you love Penny, but let's say you were single. Women here are on the hunt, and you'd have no trouble finding someone. Just don't be too eager. Most of them are here for a quick fling or to boost their confidence." Jeff pointed to a table where a woman sat surrounded by friends. "See her? She's probably just been dumped. Her friends are here to cheer her up. Give it a few weeks and she'll be looking for someone to help her feel desirable. Or to get even." He gestured toward another group of women laughing together at a different table. "Now those ladies, they're here to have fun. Some are married, some aren't, but at least one of them would take a chance on a guy like you. They're not desperate, but they're open to opportunities." As I listened to Jeff, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I wasn't looking to replace Penny, but the growing distance between us and the attention I was receiving left me wondering what this chapter of our lives would bring. As I sat nursing my drink, my phone buzzed with a text from Penny. She apologized, explaining she was too busy at work to call, and signed off with a quick, "Love you." I wanted to feel comforted, but the truth was her messages and calls had been growing more infrequent with each passing week. At least this one ended with, "Love you," which was more than her last few abrupt updates. I sent a short reply. "Love you too," then slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned to Jeff. "All right, Jeff," I said. "Let's test your theory. Prove your point." Jeff grinned. "Take off your wedding ring and head over to the bar near that table. Order yourself a drink and see what happens." Reluctantly, I removed the ring and slid it into my pocket. Following his suggestion, I moved to the bar and leaned casually against the counter, keeping the table in my peripheral vision as I waited for the bartender. It didn't take long. Within moments, one of the married women at the table discreetly slipped off her own wedding ring and walked over to me. She confidently offered to buy me a drink, but her interest evaporated the moment I mentioned that I was married. When I casually added that I'd noticed her removing her ring, her face flushed red, and she quickly retreated. Not long after, another woman from the same group approached. She placed an order for drinks, even though her table's glasses were still nearly full, and struck up a conversation. It was clear she wasn't really there for a round of drinks. I wasn't interested. And my distant body language must have given that away because she soon returned to her friends. I was finishing my drink and waiting for Jeff to return from the restroom when I heard a quiet "hi" behind me. Turning, I saw another woman from the table, the second unmarried one, standing there. Her approach was calm and composed, with none of the nervous energy I'd seen earlier. She exuded confidence, and her smile felt genuine, not calculated. If I'd been single, I might have found her intriguing. She was attractive, her honey blonde curls framing a face that looked both approachable and self-assured. Her figure was lean but healthy, and there was no wedding ring, or even a tan line to suggest one had been there. Out of habit, I glanced down at my own hand, where the absence of my ring left no telltale mark either. Tradition suggested I offer her a drink, but before I could, she raised her glass with a small smile. "No need," she said, her voice carrying an easy confidence that made her instantly likable. We started talking casually, the kind of light banter that doesn't feel forced. About 10 minutes in, I decided to come clean. "I should probably tell you, I'm married," I said, even though I wasn't wearing my ring. I could have lied or made an excuse, but something about her made me feel like honesty was the only choice. She raised an eyebrow but didn't look angry. "Then why come here without a ring? That feels misleading." I shook my head. "It's not what it looks like. My friend Jeff has this theory about women our age in bars, and he dared me to test it out. For what it's worth, one of your friends came up to me earlier and wasn't exactly shy about taking off her rings." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "That must have been Carol. She's not really my friend. I only met her tonight. She came with Sue, who I actually know. Honestly, when I saw her do that, I thought the same thing. Her poor husband." I nodded, relieved she wasn't offended. "For the record, I'm not here to cheat on my wife. I just needed a change of scenery. My wife's been away for a while, and it's been challenging." Her curiosity seemed piqued, so I explained further. "Penny's doing a 6-month training program out of state. It's been almost 2 months now, and I'm struggling more than I expected. She's busy with work and studying, so we barely talk anymore. That's why I'm here. Sitting at home alone every night is starting to get to me." Andrea, as I later learned her name was, offered a sympathetic smile. "You must miss her." "More than I can say," I admitted. "It's just been hard, feeling so disconnected. Coming here isn't about meeting anyone. I just needed to get out of the house and be around people." Andrea leaned forward slightly. "So, you're not looking for anything else? Just conversation?" Her bluntness surprised me, but I appreciated her directness. "Exactly. I'm loyal to my wife, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy a good conversation." She seemed to approve of my answer. "Well then, let's keep talking." Our conversation flowed easily after that. Andrea shared that she and her husband had grown apart after their kids moved out, realizing they were strangers after years of focusing on family. They'd split 6 months earlier on amicable terms, and Andrea was now relishing her independence. Still, she admitted, she wasn't closed off to the idea of meeting someone if the right person came along. We talked for over an hour before her friends signaled they were ready to leave. Andrea hesitated for a moment, clearly debating whether to stay, but ultimately chose to go. It felt like a compliment that she'd even considered lingering, knowing there was no romantic potential between us. After weeks of feeling overlooked by Penny, it was refreshing to be seen and appreciated, even in a platonic way. As the weeks passed, Penny's calls became even shorter and more sporadic. When I tried to bring it up, her response was dismissive. "Stop acting like a child, Mike," she snapped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Acting like a child?" I countered. "I'm just pointing out that we barely talk anymore." But my words didn't seem to matter. After that, she didn't call for 5 days. Frustrated and tired of feeling insignificant, I started going to the bar more often. My plans to visit Penny were canceled again when she told me her workload was too overwhelming. The rejection stung. It felt like I wasn't worth the effort. After 10 weeks apart, I was no longer a priority, just an inconvenience in her busy life. In our recent conversations, Penny didn't even ask about my life or what I was up to. The following week, she claimed she wasn't feeling well, blaming heavy periods and saying she wasn't in the mood for a visit. I wasn't surprised. Frustrated by her continued indifference, I broke our usual routine and called her cell phone. One of her roommates picked up. "Penny's taken some sleeping pills and gone to bed," she explained. She asked me to hold on to her phone so she wouldn't be disturbed. While Penny seemed increasingly detached, I found myself settling into an unexpectedly active social life. It beat sitting at home waiting for calls that never came. I joined a Thursday night darts league, filling in for a team that needed an extra player, and started attending Tuesday trivia nights, which turned out to be surprisingly enjoyable. I met new people, but I was always clear about my boundaries. Single women knew upfront that I was married and not looking to cheat. Andrea became a regular at the pub with her friends, and we often chatted when she was there. She briefly dated a guy, but ended things after 2 weeks. "He failed the severity test," she said with a laugh, leaving me both amused and curious about her standards. Andrea avoided prying into my situation with Penny, and she never offered opinions about my wife. I appreciated her discretion, especially since I was grappling with my own frustration and anger. After 14 weeks apart, Penny and I still barely spoke, and when we did, the conversations felt cold and rushed. I started to wonder if I even mattered to her anymore. Yes, she was busy, but would regular texts or short calls really interfere with her goals? It felt like I'd been discarded, cast aside as though I didn't exist. The more time I spent with Andrea, the more I enjoyed her company. She was warm, clever, and refreshingly down to earth. Her humor was infectious, and I found myself looking forward to our talks. When she needed help, like dealing with an overly persistent guy at the bar, she'd give me a subtle signal. I'd step in, kiss her cheek, and play the role of her boyfriend until the guy got the hint and left. Then we'd laugh about it and carry on as usual. What troubled me most was how much I looked forward to seeing her. Our conversations weren't romantic or inappropriate. We debated trivial topics like Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. But when she wasn't there, I couldn't deny the pang of disappointment I felt. For the first time, I truly understood how easily someone could be drawn into an affair. Clichés I'd once dismissed, "my wife doesn't understand me" or "my wife ignores me," suddenly felt uncomfortably familiar. I wasn't justifying infidelity, but I finally understood how someone might slide into it. I was tempted, more than I cared to admit. I never imagined I'd be in such a position, but as Penny's indifference grew, so did the temptation. I hadn't crossed any lines with Andrea. So far, I'd managed to keep things respectful and appropriate, but I wasn't blind to the fact that my self-control was being tested. Penny's behavior didn't help. Her growing absence and lack of interest in our marriage left me feeling like I was teetering on the edge. I wondered if she felt the same temptations, but I quickly dismissed the thought. Between her work and studies, she didn't have the time or energy to think about me, let alone someone else. We were only halfway through her 6-month course, but I knew something had to change. If things stayed the same, or got worse, our marriage might not survive the remaining weeks. I never thought I'd be the kind of man tempted to stray, but I could no longer deny how real the possibility had become. Determined to salvage our relationship, I decided to call Penny instead of waiting for her to reach out. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "I can't talk for long," she replied immediately. I swallowed my irritation. Getting angry wouldn't help. "I understand you're busy," I said evenly, "but I need you to make time for this. I'll keep it brief." She sighed impatiently, a sound that only added to my frustration, but I pressed on. "Penny, it feels like you don't have time for me anymore. Our calls are rare, and when we do talk, you act like I'm a burden. I have feelings and needs too. It's like you've forgotten there are 2 people in this marriage. Yes, I want to support and encourage you, but I also need some of your attention." Her response was swift and defensive. "Are you kidding me, Mike? I've spent my entire adult life putting this family first. Now it's my turn." I clenched my jaw but stayed calm. "You're making it sound like I haven't sacrificed for this family. I've given up so much to put you and the kids first. So tell me, Penny, when exactly was it my turn? Did I miss it while working overtime to make ends meet?" Her voice rose sharply. "How dare you, Mike? How dare you? I've worked just as hard and sacrificed just as much. You ignorant son of a—" I let her rant without interrupting, listening as she hurled insults and anger my way. When she finally paused, I took a deep breath and tried again. "Penny, this isn't about who sacrificed more. It's about our marriage. If we keep going like this, there won't be anything left by the time you finish this course." Her response was cold and dismissive. "You're being so dramatic. Stop whining and grow up, Mike." Her words stung, and I hung up before the conversation could spiral further. My phone buzzed almost immediately with her return call. "Look, I'm sorry," she said, her tone softening, "but you have to understand how important this is to me. I need this. Our marriage is fine." I bit back the urge to argue. She wasn't listening. "I miss you too," she added, "and I'm sorry you're struggling, but in the long run, this is for us. You'll see. We're already halfway there. When I get back, I'll take care of the house again, and you'll eat properly." Her words felt hollow, but I said nothing. I just hoped we'd have a marriage left to fix when she returned. Her tone had felt patronizing, as if I were a helpless child who couldn't function without her. Yes, it's hard being without her, I thought, but not for the reasons she thinks. What I missed wasn't just her presence. It was the deeper connection we shared, the closeness, the conversations, the sense of partnership. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, her absence left a gaping hole in my life, as though a part of me had been severed. I made a vague noise of acknowledgement, which she seemed to take as agreement. "Great. Glad we're on the same page. I really have to go," she said briskly, ending the call without so much as a goodbye, let alone an "I love you." Frustrated and restless, I grabbed my keys and drove to the pub, hoping a beer would help dull the disappointment. But as I sat nursing my drink, I realized coming here was a mistake. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or the friendly noise of the bar. My emotions churned, hurt, anger, and something harder to name. Like a shadow of anxiety I couldn't shake. Not even Andrea's cheerful wave across the room could lift my spirits. I finished my drink quickly, muttered a half-hearted goodbye, and left. When I got home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Andrea. "Are you okay? You didn't seem yourself tonight. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I stared at the message, feeling an unexpected lump in my throat. In just a few months, Andrea, a woman I barely knew before all this, showed more concern for me than my wife of 28 years. The realization hit me like a punch. I slumped onto the couch, staring at the text, unsure how to respond. For the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. Had I let Andrea get too close? Was I crossing a line emotionally? I hadn't confided in her about Penny or our marriage, and I'd avoided saying anything that I wouldn't admit openly. But still, I could sense how easy it would be to let things slide into dangerous territory. I needed to be careful. After composing myself, I typed out a reply. "Thanks, Andrea. Just a rough day, but I'm fine. See you Thursday if you're around. Take care." I reread it several times, checking the tone before hitting send. Then I grabbed some leftovers, eating them cold at the kitchen counter, while my mind wandered. Penny and I hadn't even discussed my next visit. She hadn't brought it up, and I didn't want to wait any longer to see her. I decided on the spur of the moment to surprise her with a trip. Maybe seeing her in person would remind us both of what we were fighting for. Friday afternoon, I left work early, caught a flight, and by early evening, I was standing outside Penny's place. The door opened to a young woman I recognized from previous calls, her roommate, Jenny. She looked surprised, but smiled and led me into their modest living room. "Penny and Gail aren't back from school yet," she explained. As I reached for my phone to let Penny know I was there, Jenny stopped me. "I can call her," she offered quickly. Before she could dial, the sound of a key turning in the lock drew our attention. Penny stepped inside, her expression flickering between shock and delight. "Mike," she said, giving me a quick kiss. "What a surprise. Be right back," she added, heading straight to the bathroom. I noticed she took her phone with her, which struck me as odd, but I kept quiet. Jenny and I exchanged some awkward small talk while waiting. Penny took longer than I expected, and when she finally emerged, she barely paused before disappearing into her room, calling back, "Keep chatting with Jenny." Jenny seemed to relax once Penny was out of sight, and our conversation became more natural. We even laughed a little, though I couldn't shake the strange vibe in the apartment. Penny busied herself in her room, tidying up and carrying sheets to the laundry. I watched her move back and forth, wondering if she was trying to make an impression, like she used to when we first started dating. Eventually, Penny invited me to shower and freshen up before we headed out to dinner. I noticed her open the window wide, letting in the chilly air, something she'd always hated, but I chose not to comment. Seeing her undressed again after so many months stirred feelings I'd been suppressing. I suggested skipping dinner and enjoying some private time, but she shook her head, laughing. "Patience, Mike. After dinner, I'm starving." We ended up at a seafood restaurant Penny had mentioned before. Over 2 bottles of Riesling, we talked and laughed, revisiting memories that felt light years away. When I cracked my old joke about oysters, "They're supposed to be an aphrodisiac, but I ate 12 once, and the last 3 didn't work," she laughed so hard that for a moment everything felt right. But something was off. Penny's phone buzzed constantly, and she seemed glued to it, answering texts in the middle of our conversation. I tried to ignore it at first, but it was impossible not to notice. Finally, I decided to speak up. "Penny, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but texting at dinner feels a little rude. She looked up, a hint of guilt in her expression. I know, but some of the younger students see me as a mentor. They need advice. I won't be long. Her explanation didn't sit well with me, but I let it go, focusing instead on trying to make the evening feel like one of our old date nights. Penny asked how long I planned to stay, her tone so casual it bordered on indifferent. It felt like she was already calculating how soon she could send me home. I swallowed my disappointment and reminded myself that this was about reconnecting, no matter how uncomfortable the vibe felt. When we returned to her place, it was nearly 11. Another car was parked in the driveway, which Penny explained belonged to Gail, her other roommate, who worked late shifts at a restaurant. The apartment was quiet and dimly lit. After dinner, wine, and the earlier shower, I was ready to reconnect in more ways than one. I picked Penny up and carried her to her room, laying her on the bed. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in her, there was a strange tension in the air, something unspoken that kept me from fully relaxing. It felt as though the woman in my arms was a stranger, and that unsettling feeling lingered long after we turned out the lights. Dinner had been awkward, like we were two strangers trying to make small talk. The conversation lacked any of the warmth or ease we used to share, and I found myself thinking back to the beginning of our relationship. Those uncertain, nerve-wracking early days of trying to impress one another, except this time it felt hollow, like we were going through the motions. Later, as Penny lay sprawled on the bed, slightly drunk, I began to undress her. To my surprise, she responded in a way that felt completely unfamiliar. Her moans were louder, her movements more exaggerated, almost theatrical. Penny had always been reserved in moments like this, her modesty a hallmark of her personality. But tonight, there was none of that restraint. She was wild, almost unrecognizable. Before I could make sense of her unusual behavior, a loud, impatient knock shattered the moment. The flimsy bedroom door rattled as a woman's irritated voice cut through the air.
Penny! Seriously, Jake? 3 nights in a row? Some of us need sleep!
The words landed like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, piecing together every odd detail from the past few months. The shaved pubic area, the sudden resistance to my visits, the awkwardness earlier in the evening, the fresh bed linens, and her prolonged time in the bathroom when she first got home. It all made sense now. Jake? Was he the one she had been texting at dinner? I turned to look at Penny, and her wide-eyed expression confirmed everything. Her lips parted as though to offer an explanation, but no words came out. She looked disheveled, her makeup smeared, her hair in disarray. The legs I once admired now made my stomach churn. I felt sick. Without saying a word, I began dressing, every movement stiff and deliberate as I struggled to keep my anger in check. My hands moved mechanically as I zipped my carry-on bag. I refused to look at her, knowing my temper was teetering on the edge. She wasn't worth losing control over. Penny, sensing my resolve, suddenly became defensive.
6 months is a long time, she shouted. You've only been gone for 15 weeks. What did you expect? I bet you've been cheating too. Why should I sit here and wait while you're off doing whatever you want? I deserve to have fun too. For once, I felt young and free, not like some old woman stuck waiting to become a grandmother.
Her words barely registered. I slung my bag over my shoulder and muttered, "At least now I know." Desperation seeped into her tone.
It's not just Jake, she yelled. We can get through this. We can fix it.
I stopped and turned, my voice calm but firm.
No, Penny, we can't.
She started shouting again as I walked down the hallway, her words becoming more frantic with each step I took. Muffled voices from the other rooms signaled her roommates had noticed the commotion, but I didn't care. My only goal was to leave. Reaching the front door, I yanked it open just as someone pulled it from the other side. Standing there was a young woman I assumed to be Gail, her face a mix of confusion and curiosity. Behind her, Jenny hovered uncertainly, her expression caught somewhere between pity and discomfort. Gail's brow furrowed as she asked sharply, "Who are you?" Without pausing, I walked past her, tossing a reply over my shoulder. "Penny's ex-husband." I emphasized the word ex before stepping into the cool night air and letting the door slam shut behind me. I took a deep breath, the crisp air biting at my skin, and felt a strange mix of anger and relief. My marriage was over, that much was clear. There was a plane to catch, a lawyer to call, and a lifetime of pieces to pick up. But for now, there was also a story to tell, a shattered heart to mend, and perhaps in time someone new to share a drink with. Maybe even a honey blonde with a kind smile and a listening ear waiting at the bar.
I flinched when Mike picked up the phone, startled by the sound of his voice. After 4 days of unanswered calls, I'd all but given up hope of reaching him. "Penelope, what's wrong? I can't talk for long, he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. The words I'd rehearsed, the apologies I'd planned, they all evaporated. I froze, blindsided not by anger or sorrow but by his indifference. He didn't sound hurt, furious, or even disappointed. Instead, there was an air of detachment, like I was a distant acquaintance interrupting his day. I opened my mouth to speak but hesitated too long. His sigh crackled through the line, heavy with impatience. Look, Penelope, I don't have time for this. If it's important, say it quickly. I'm busy. It's quiz night. Quiz night? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. That's your excuse? How can you prioritize a trivia game over our marriage? His response was icy. Clearly, Penelope, you don't understand. Quiz night is important to me. I need this. The echo of those last words, I need this, stung. They brought back memories of conversations we'd had in recent months, ones I'd brushed aside or dismissed. Now they hung between us, sharper and more cutting than I'd expected. Don't belittle our marriage like that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. Mike's tone turned exasperated. Why should I bother? You don't listen anyway. I've got to go. My team relies on me. Maybe we'll talk later. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, half expecting it to flash back to life, as if some mistake had been made. But no, he'd hung up. Just like that. The glass of wine I'd poured earlier meant to calm my nerves now tasted bitter, like regret itself. I sat motionless, replaying the brief conversation in my mind, anger and sadness bubbling under the surface. I should have gone home days ago. Waiting had been a mistake. I should have confronted him in person, no matter how difficult it might have been. But I hadn't. I'd hesitated, trapped by a swirl of fear, guilt, and self-doubt. And then there was the training program. It wasn't just an excuse. It was a real priority. The exam on Monday was critical, the culmination of 3 months of work. I'd poured my energy into preparing for it, hoping that the focus would keep me from obsessing over Mike's silence. Now the exam was over, and I was out of distractions. Still, I hadn't booked a ticket home. I told myself it was because of logistics, but deep down, I knew the truth. Facing Mike on his turf, our house, felt too real. The apartment here had become a bubble, a place where I could pretend everything was still under control. I glanced at my phone, my thumb hovering over the messages from Jake. The temptation to open them was overwhelming, but I resisted, locking the screen and setting it aside. I walked to the kitchen, hoping food might distract me, but even the simplest meal felt like too much effort. Defeated, I returned to my room and lay down, staring blankly at the ceiling. The thoughts I'd been avoiding came rushing in. How could I make Mike understand that my actions weren't about him? That they didn't diminish my love for him or the life we'd built together? Our marriage wasn't in jeopardy. It never had been. My heart still belonged to him, and it always would. A flicker of frustration surfaced. Why couldn't he see past his pride? Yes, I'd made mistakes. Big ones. But they didn't define us. My indiscretions were physical, nothing more. My heart, my mind, my loyalty to him as a partner had never wavered. Couldn't he understand that? And yet, a small voice inside me whispered that I was rationalizing. My actions had hurt him deeply, no matter how I tried to frame them. I rolled over and my eyes landed on Mike's deodorant sitting on the nightstand, a forgotten remnant of his hasty departure. I picked it up, the scent hitting me like a tidal wave of memories. Tears burned my eyes as I clutched it to my chest, the pain of his absence sharper than ever. I tried to focus on the positives. Mike hadn't told the kids. They hadn't called, which meant they were still unaware. He hadn't exploded in anger or thrown insults at me. That had to be a good sign, didn't it? But another thought crept in, dark and insidious. What if his calm demeanor was just a mask? What if behind the scenes he was planning his next move, meeting with lawyers, freezing our accounts, changing the locks? My stomach churned and I shot out of bed, rushing to grab my laptop. My hands shook as I opened it and logged into our shared bank account. Relief washed over me when I saw the balance untouched. Mike hadn't done anything, yet. But as I stared at the screen, another wave of anxiety hit. Just because he hasn't acted now doesn't mean he won't, a voice in my head whispered. Closing the laptop, I buried my face in my hands. I couldn't escape the gnawing sense that everything was slipping further out of control. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the keyboard, before transferring a small sum to an old account in my name. It was just enough for a plane ticket, food, and transportation. Barely a safety net, but enough to feel like I had options. As I moved to log out, a notification caught my eye. A message. From Jake. Jake, the gorgeous 25-year-old whose flirtation had been a fleeting escape from reality. Too old to date my daughters, but young enough to make me feel alive, desired, and reckless. My eyes welled up again as the emotions I'd been pushing down surged forward. I hated myself for wanting to call him, for wanting him to look at me the way he had before, with hunger and admiration, for the way his words had made me feel hot and unstoppable. I cursed myself for letting it start in the first place. One too many drinks at a class gathering, trying to blend in with peers so much younger than me. It had felt exhilarating, forbidden, and intoxicating. And then it had spiraled. I knew if I responded to Jake's messages, he would come, and I wanted him to. That thought sent a jolt of guilt through me, and I whimpered, biting my knuckle to keep the sound from escaping. I had to stop. If Mike came back and found out, it would be the end of everything. Turning onto my stomach, I accidentally knocked the laptop off the bed. It hit the floor with a loud crash, but I didn't care. I buried my face in the pillow, tears soaking the fabric as I cried for everything I'd lost, and for the steep price I knew I'd have to pay to rebuild what remained. I couldn't give in again. I couldn't let this dependence destroy what little chance I had left. At some point, exhaustion overtook me. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was pouring through the window. I felt groggy and drained, but I forced myself out of bed and into the bathroom. The shower scalded my skin, grounding me. Later, as I inserted my key into the lock of our house, relief flooded me. It turned without resistance. Mike hadn't changed the locks. It was a small mercy, but a powerful one. He hadn't drained the bank accounts, hadn't told the kids, and hadn't filed for divorce. Days had passed since our last strained conversation. He'd had plenty of time to act, but the lock worked. This had to be a sign. Mike would forgive me. It might take time, but he would. He loved me, and he was a good man, the best man I'd ever known. Of course, our marriage wouldn't be the same. I would have to earn his trust again, every day. And Mike? He would carry the knowledge that I had turned to someone else for comfort. But we could survive this. We had to. Opening the door, I stepped into a house that felt almost foreign after so many months. I expected chaos, a mess left by a man living alone, but was instead met with pristine order. The living room was spotless. Curious, I wandered into the kitchen. Clean. The dining room? Not a speck of dust. It was as if he'd prepared for my return, which felt like another hopeful sign. But where was he? It was 6:30. He should have been home by now, probably looking for dinner. I walked to the stove and ran my fingers over the burners. Cold. Opening the fridge, I found it fully stocked, with a plate of fried chicken and vegetables neatly wrapped in plastic. Had he made dinner for me? Or had he eaten out? There were no dirty dishes in the sink, no crumbs on the counter. He could have cleaned up, but something about the scene didn't sit right. I considered texting him, but our last conversation made me hesitate. He hadn't responded to my flight details or offered to pick me up from the airport. Sighing, I filled the kettle to make tea, trying to make sense of the mixed signals. On one hand, he hadn't done anything to suggest he wanted to end our marriage. On the other, his silence spoke volumes. Perhaps he was trying to punish me, letting me stew in my own guilt. Tea in hand, I sat at the dining table and stared at the chairs around me. Memories of family dinners flooded my mind. Laughter, banter, the chaotic energy of raising kids. We weren't wealthy, but our home had always been rich with love. Mike would remember that too. He wasn't the kind of man to let our children feel torn between their parents. For their sake, if nothing else, he would try to forgive me. But where was he? Leaving my tea untouched, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. It was clear he'd been home recently. The faint warmth of the bathroom lingered. Once again, the immaculate state of the room struck me. Mike had always been tidy, but I had expected some signs of bachelor life creeping in during my absence. Deep in thought, I returned downstairs, absently stirring my now cold tea. Something nagged at the back of my mind, a fragment of a conversation from early in my course. A name. Mike had mentioned someone. Was it John? Jason? None of those seemed right. And then it came to me. Jeff. I darted to the sideboard where we kept an old notebook, a relic from the days when we were too lazy to save numbers in our phones. Flipping through the worn pages, I found the entry, Jeff Saunders. The name was scrawled under S with a cell number added in a different ink, clearly an update from years later. I stared at the number, my heart pounding. Maybe Jeff held the missing pieces of the puzzle. I punched Jeff's number into my phone, my hands trembling as I pressed call. The line rang several times before it went to voicemail. Frustrated, I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing in the quiet room. A sudden ding from the microwave snapped me out of my anger. I'd forgotten all about the leftovers I'd reheated. Needing a distraction, I retrieved the plate and sat at the table. The chicken was better than I expected, perfectly seasoned and still moist. For a fleeting moment, I thought about Mike. Maybe I'd suggest he cook more often once we worked through this mess. That is, if we still had a chance to fix things. I set the empty plate in the sink, wiped my hands, and stared at my phone. My nerves twisted as I prepared to call Jeff again. What if Mike had confided in him? What if Jeff threw every detail back at me in anger? But avoiding the call wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, I pressed redial. This time he picked up on the third ring. Hello? His voice was wary, with an edge I couldn't quite place. Hi, Jeff, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It's Penny Granger. I was wondering, do you know where Mike is? There was a long pause, filled with the muffled noise of voices and laughter in the background. My grip on the phone tightened as I waited. Penny, he said at last, his tone neutral. Long time. Yes, I said awkwardly. It has been. How are you? And Jane, the kids? Jane's fine, he said, his tone pointed as if daring me to forget her name. The kids are great. Thanks for asking. And you? There it was, that knowing tone in Jeff's voice. He already knew. I've been better, I admitted, fumbling for words. Is Mike with you? Yes, he is, Jeff said. And where are you? I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. We're at a darts competition, he replied casually. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. That sounds fun. Where's it being held? At the pub, Jeff answered. Which pub? I pressed, trying to mask my growing frustration. My local one, he said with infuriating nonchalance. Jeff, I said tightly, my patience slipping. What's the name of the pub? The Royal, he finally admitted. I clenched my jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of another question. Thank you, I said curtly and hung up. His parting words, dripping with sarcasm, anything for Mike's loving wife, echoed in my mind. I opened my laptop and typed The Royal Pub into the search bar. Predictably, there were several results. Royal Arms, Royal George, Royal Oak. After combing through event pages and websites, I finally found it. The Royal Oak, hosting a couples darts competition. I grabbed my bag and paused at the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back, disheveled and far from my best. With shaking hands, I combed my hair and touched up my makeup. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Sliding into the driver's seat of my car, I punched the Royal Oaks address into my GPS. The drive was short, but it felt like an eternity. My mind raced with questions and scenarios, none of which brought me any comfort. When I arrived, I was relieved to see the pub had its own parking lot. After squeezing into one of the last spaces, I sat in the car for a moment, trying to collect myself. The noise from inside reached my ears, laughter and chatter spilling out as someone opened the door. Taking a deep breath, I got out and headed in. The pub's main room was packed, the air warm with the hum of voices and the occasional thud of darts hitting their mark. My eyes scanned the room, searching for Mike. When I finally spotted him, my stomach twisted. He was seated near the dartboards, watching a game intently. Beside him sat a blonde woman, her posture relaxed, her hand resting casually on the table near his. She wasn't watching the game. She was watching the door, watching me. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, I knew. Her expression was calm but knowing, as though she had been expecting me. I froze, heat rising to my cheeks as she leaned closer to Mike and lightly touched his hand. Mike turned to her first, then followed her gaze to meet mine. I don't know what I had prepared for, anger, sadness, or even guilt. But it wasn't this. His face showed no emotion. He looked steady, composed, and completely unaffected. That calmness cut deeper than any outburst could have. I didn't realize someone was standing beside me until a familiar voice broke through the haze. "Penny," Jeff said, stepping into my line of sight. I startled, taking a small step back. "Jeff," I stammered. I came to see Mike." "I figured," he said dryly, his tone far from welcoming. "Is he okay?" I asked, the words tumbling out. "I mean, after everything?" Jeff raised an eyebrow. "He's fine, better than fine, actually." "Better?" I repeated, incredulous. "How could he be better? He's just hiding how hurt he is, isn't he? Mike's not the kind of man to let everyone see his pain." "Hiding it?" Jeff said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If that's true, he deserves an award." I glanced past Jeff to see Mike laughing at something the blonde said. She leaned in closer, handing him a dart. He smiled warmly and lightly patted her hand before focusing on the dartboard. My chest tightened. Whatever this was, it wasn't casual. I felt a sharp pang of jealousy and regret. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice low but firm. Jeff smirked. "Andrea. She's been great for him. They make a good team, don't you think?" I wanted to scream, to cry, to march over to Mike and demand answers. But I couldn't move. Instead, I stood there rooted to the spot as everything I thought I knew about my husband and our marriage crumbled around me. I had always understood the fleeting nature of my attraction to younger men. They were intoxicating in their way, charming, vibrant, and a welcome distraction. But ultimately, they left me hollow. Mike, on the other hand, had been my foundation. He offered something real, something enduring. He was the man who provided substance when I needed it most. I tried to sound casual as I pressed further, though my voice betrayed me. Is she here with someone? Married?" Jeff's smirk widened, and I could tell he was enjoying my discomfort. "Yes, she's here with someone. No, she's not married." A knot tightened in my stomach, and I felt my heartbeat quicken as I forced myself to ask the inevitable. "Who is she here with?" "With Mike," he said, his tone flat, as if delivering a weather report. Even though I'd prepared myself for this, the words landed like a blow. I stumbled back a step, unable to mask the pain in my voice. "Well, that didn't take long." Jeff's gaze hardened, his smirk fading. "On the contrary," he said coldly. "Mike's had 4 months to get used to being alone." He glanced back at the pair, watching as Andrea leaned in to whisper something to Mike, her laugh soft but unmistakably passionate. Jeff's lips curled into a faint smile. "And it looks like he's adjusted just fine," he added, his tone sharp enough to cut. When he turned back to me, the smile was gone, replaced by a steely glare. "But then again, so have you," he said, his words striking like a final verdict. "It's been 8 years since the divorce, but the regret hasn't eased. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could undo the choices that led to our separation. When it became clear that reconciliation was out of reach, I buried my pain in the arms of younger men. It was an escape, but a hollow one. Each fleeting connection only underscored what I'd lost. The thrill diminished with every encounter, leaving me chasing an illusion of fulfillment that slipped further out of reach. My relationships grew shorter, emptier, and more desperate. I crossed lines I once believed were beneath me, all in pursuit of something that no longer existed. Now I sit in my kitchen surrounded by silence. The house that once brimmed with warmth and laughter feels cold and empty without Mike. The echoes of a life I destroyed linger in every corner. The clock reminds me that it's time to leave for work. I grab my bag and head for the door, pausing briefly to catch my reflection in the mirror. A 56-year-old woman stares back at me, her face marked by the passage of time. The youthful glow that once turned heads has faded, and the men I once charmed, those vibrant 20-somethings, are now closer to 30 or 40, their interest waning. What options do I have? The good men my age have no interest in someone with a reputation like mine. I've thought about moving, starting fresh on the other side of the country. But that would mean leaving my children, and I already don't see them enough as it is. Meanwhile, I imagine Mike and Andrea living the life I threw away. They're probably lounging on a beach somewhere, sipping cocktails and enjoying the love I squandered. And here I am, changing hospital sheets, taking patient temperatures, and mourning the future I destroyed. My marriage? My career? My dignity? For what? For sugar. Sweet, fleeting sugar that dissolved the moment I tasted it. Blinking back tears, I square my shoulders and open the door. The world keeps moving, indifferent to my regrets. And as I step outside, I remind myself that no one cares. So why should I? After all these years, as I sit here reflecting, I realize there's no escaping the choices that shape our lives. Regret, it seems, is a companion you can never truly shake off, one that lingers in the quiet moments and sneaks into your thoughts when you least expect it. But regret is not the end of the story. It's a reminder, a constant whisper that life, no matter how messy, is still unfolding. Every misstep, every misjudgment has led me to this point. Not a perfect ending, perhaps, but one with its own kind of clarity. And now, as the dusk fades into night, I take a deep breath. I can't rewrite the past, but maybe, just maybe, I can still shape the future. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but somewhere inside, I know. This chapter isn't the final one. The pen is still in my hand,